Okay, we're calling the meeting to order, everybody. All right, we were banging gavels up here. Now we got everybody's attention. Okay, thanks. Yeah, so we're calling the June 10th, 2026 meeting of the Open Space Board of Trustees to order, and I'll do a little roll call. Director or Trustee Glenn.
Present.
Trustee Zuckerman.
Right here.
And I am present, and Carol and Lamel are currently absent. We do have a quorum, but there's just going to be 3 of us for this evening. And next, I'd like to approve the minutes. Usually we go page by page. Does anybody have any comments on page 1 of the minutes? You weren't here last time. Yeah.
So
we don't have a quorum for the.
We don't have a quorum for a vote on the minutes, but maybe we could. I have one comment I could make, and then.
Why don't you make the comment, and then we may have a quorum for the minutes at the end of the meeting. We'll
okay.
See. Yeah.
Awesome.
So, any comments on page 1?
Mine's on page 2. Where is it? Page 3. Page 3.
Any comments on page 2? Any comments on page 3?
I have one. So where there's the last long paragraph on page 3, it says Harmon asked if it would be an incentive to create a position to run these residences. Could the use of properties fund its own renewal? Makes it sound like the position would be taking the revenue to fund its own renewal, and I meant the renewal of the properties. So if you could change the its to their, to fund their own renewal or rehabilitation, their own rehabilitation, okay, maybe would be better. Thank you. You were online. Actually, you could.
My memory is foggy. So
yeah.
You were online? Okay. All right. So we do have a quorum. And with that one amendment, would anyone like to move to approve these minutes?
I'll move to approve the Open Space Board of Trustees action minutes from May 13th, 2026.
I'll second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed? All right, it passes. All right. And what's next? So now we've got public comment for items not identified for a public hearing. We do have at least 18 people signed up, and when it's over 15, we at our discretion we can move from 3 minutes to 2 minutes. We would like to keep it to 3 for everybody. You showed up, you're all sitting here, and we want to honor that, and we would just ask that you try to really be on time with your 3 minutes. So thank you for that. And with that, I'll hand it over for the rules of decorum.
Thank you. The city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and OSBT, as well as democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. For more information about this vision and the community engagement processes, please visit this website. The city will enforce the rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code, including participants are required to sign up to speak by using the name they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. No attendee shall disrupt, disturb, or otherwise impede the orderly conduct of any city meeting in a manner that obstructs the business of the meeting. This also includes failing to obey any lawful order of the presiding officer, to leave the meeting room, or refrain from addressing the board. Only one person at a time at the podium, unless an accommodation like an interpreter is required. All remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No standing in or otherwise blocking the aisles in violation of the fire code or in a way that obstructs the vision or audio of other audience members. No signs or flags shall be permitted in council chambers except for one sign held by a person, with the sign measuring no more than 11 by 17 inches, which is held no higher than the person's face. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. We ask that you not affix items to the podium or dais or walls or other surfaces of the chamber. Signs, flags, or other items used to communicate must be held by one person when displayed. Obscenity, other epithets based on race, gender, or religion, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the meeting will not be tolerated. In-person participants are asked to refrain from expressing support or disagreement verbally or with sounds, such as applause or snapping, with the exception of declarations. Traditionally, support is shown through American Sign Language applause or jazz hands. If you're joining in person and would like to speak during public comment or items identified for public hearing and you haven't had a chance to sign up yet, you can just come up here and I can get you signed up. We'll call you up to speak at the podium. If you're joining online, you can raise your hand when we remind you to do that during the public comment items. You can do that by clicking the raise hand icon, or if you're joining by phone, you can hit *9 and it will raise your hand for you. And I will share that reminder when we get closer. Okay. So we're going to start with public comment.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. So first we'll start with Jerry Lynn DeCateau, followed by Paula Palmer, and then Lori Rugenstein. So Jerry Lynn.
Thank you. I'm Geraldine Dakota. I'm a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians in North Dakota. I've lived in Boulder the Boulder area since 1984. I'm a founder of Right Relationship Boulder, whose members have studied Fort Chambers history carefully. I want to address two aspects of the proposed design for Fort Chambers: the need to include historical context and what is called the big idea. So the project begins, like so many accounts of our country's history, with European arrival, ignoring the Indian tribe's presence on the land for 13,000 years, and ignoring that Boulder Valley was part of sovereign Arapaho territory. The miners knew this when they arrived. They asked Chief Nawath for permission to stay the winter. So we need to get a sense of this land prior to European arrival. We need to see Chief Nawath's winter camps, how they lived, and hear Arapaho spoken. We need to see what the Europeans saw when they arrived here, that this was a homeland to a whole people, and later the project needs to say what became of the Arapaho and the Cheyenne. The interpretive framework, the big idea, is that Fort Chambers was built because the settlers feared Indian uprisings. Fear was instilled by false reports of Indian attacks and fueled by John Evans' proclamation calling on private citizens to kill Indians and take their property for their own use. As noted on the project website, at the time the 3rd Colorado Regiment was raised, which Company D was part of, the idea was very general that a war, and this is a quote, very general that a war of extermination should be waged, that neither sex nor age should be spared, and women held to these views in common with men. Yet the design mentions settlers' fears 34 times. Any fear the Arapaho may have felt is not mentioned. As depicted in the plan, the settlers were good people whose fear justified and excused their actions. The Arapaho's need to protect their homes and families, food sources, and sovereign territory was ignored. The plan falsely equates settler and Arapaho and Cheyenne experiences. The design presents parallel stories as if these were moral equivalents. Instead, the design should make clear that Fort Chambers site is about Boulder men who trained as, quote, Indian fighters and set out to murder innocent Arapaho and Cheyenne people. The project needs to present a fuller and accurate history of Fort Chambers. As it is, the project misses the opportunity to present the truth, acknowledge the harm, and begin work toward right relationship. Thank you for hearing my comments.
Next is Paula Palmer, followed by Lori Rugenstein, and then Francis Harto.
Good evening. My name is Paula Palmer. I am a founder of Right Relationship Boulder, and I've been doing research on Fort Chambers since 2016, 2 years before the city purchased the Fort Chambers property. My comments are about the zones called decompression and discovery in the city's interpretive design. The design of the decompression zone is historically inaccurate. As visitors walk along the path, displays show a gradual increase in the settler population and a corresponding gradual decrease in the Cheyenne and Arapaho populations. In reality, there was nothing gradual about this. After gold was discovered here, 100,000 people poured into the Front Range all at once in the summer of 1859. Imagine what that would feel like if it happened here today. Imagine what it felt like to Chief Nawath, who led the Arapaho out of the Boulder Valley to avoid conflict. Native people had been here for 13,000 years and suddenly they were gone. We also think the artistic representation of the Arapaho and Cheyenne populations is offensive. It is a vertical pile of poles, which harkens back to the wooden Indian stereotype. In the current design, there's no representation of the fort that gives any sense of what it was or what happened there. We have urged the Open Space Department to implement the suggestion of Fred Mesquita, the Arapaho tribal representative. Mr. Mesquita wants visitors to walk through a reconstruction of the gate of the fort, entering an area that could actually have the feel of a fort, where exhibits tell how Boulder men rallied to the call for Indian fighters and set off to commit the Sand Creek Massacre. The space currently designated for this discovery area is too small to tell the story accurately. It needs to be bigger. In the Discovery Zone, we believe it is essential to name the names of the Arapaho and Cheyenne people who died at Sand Creek, and the names of the men of Boulder's Company D, who killed many of them. Just think of the impact of the names on the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. The names make it real. We're glad to see the stone marker displayed in the Discovery Zone, but we think a lot of the artistic notions in the 4 options that are presented will be lost on visitors. The story just needs to be told in a straightforward way. Just as the stone marker misrepresented the truth and served the interests of the people who erected it, we need to take care not to misrepresent the truth today and to critically examine whose interests we are serving. Thank you very much.
Next is Lori Rugenstein, followed by Francis Harto, and then Mike Browning.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Laurie Rugenstein, and I'm a member of Right Relationship Boulder. I've lived here since 1988. I'll be speaking to the city's interpretive design of the Fort Chambers property, addressing the zones called the Contemplation Area and the Reemergence Area. The interpretive statement and purpose for the Contemplation Area indicates that, quote, this loop asks visitors to consider responsibility in the present. What does it mean to stand on land shaped by care, by violence, by extraction, and now by healing? The inclusion of "and now by healing" is whitewashing what was done to the Cheyenne and Arapaho people. Where is the healing of the genocide that was inflicted on them and the land that was stolen from them? How do you think it feels to the Native people to have been forcibly removed from their homeland and then to have this land abused by the extractive practices of the settler colonizers? Mending the damaged land does not lead to healing the people. The reemergence area seems even more problematic. The visual depiction of increasing sod bales representing settler colonizer presence and the increasing number of poles representing Native presence and influence is completely false. The reemergence area might represent what we wish were happening, but it's not really taking place. This is a fantasy intended to make people feel that all is well. Instead, visitors should leave with challenging questions, such as, where are the Arapaho and Cheyenne people now that they've been driven from their homeland? And what are their lives like? What are our lives like as people of Boulder? And how do we feel about the disparity between our lives and theirs? Where is the Native presence and influence in Boulder? Are Native people on city and county boards and commissions? Have we returned any of the stolen land to the tribes or paid them anything for this land? Have we paid any reparations to the descendants of the innocent people who were killed in the Sand Creek Massacre? What would it mean to build relationships with the Arapaho and Cheyenne based on truth, respect, and justice? Walking back to the parking lot, visitors should be asked questions such as these and asked to write their responses on cards that are provided or record them via a link to the OSPM website with a QR code. There should be a process for staff to review these submissions. I want the true story to be told. The people of Boulder can handle it, and we need to. Thank you.
Next is Frances Harto, followed by Mike Browning and then Wendy Sweet. And Frances, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Great, thank you. I'm Frances Hartog. My comments are on the proposal to allow mountain biking on the Greenbrier Connector Trail and part of the Mesa Trail. As a former open space trustee, I have a multi-year history of working with the mountain biking community to address access for this popular sport. I'm also an avid cyclist, a South Boulder resident, mom of a Fairview High School grad, and frequent user of the Greenbrier Connector. So I can say from experience that this popular neighborhood trail is not suitable for mountain biking. As our only local trail not open to dogs, the trail is used by many senior citizens. It's also home to ground nesting birds that will be disturbed by fast-moving cyclists. In addition, the trail surface is soft and will quickly rut out with bike use. Finally, after years of negotiating the West Trail study area, hours of community involvement, we agreed on no bikes west of Broadway, especially on the Mesa Trail. So let's not undo years of community input and staff work by using unscientific survey results. Thanks so much for your time and service.
Okay, next is Mike Browning, followed by Wendy Sweet and Linda Andis George. Mike, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yes, thank you. Yes, my name is Mike Browning. I live in Southwest Boulder, have for about 35 years. I probably hike the Shanahan Ridge area 4 or 5 times a week. And I was very involved in the West TSA study process some 10 or 15 years ago. It was an extraordinarily extensive public process, really brought all the members of the community out. And as Ms. Hartog had said, was, largely negotiated with West TSA being bike free in all areas west of Broadway in exchange for more mountain biking trails elsewhere in the open space area. So I don't think it's appropriate to now do ad hoc exceptions to that West TSA compromise that was reached and allow mountain bikes as part of it. I don't think it's necessary for safety. Mountain bikers can ride safely on paved roads. Maybe it's not as pleasant, maybe it's not as fun, but safety and fun are important, but they shouldn't trump all other considerations. And I'm concerned that if any part of the West TSA is allowed for mountain bike riding, there's no practical way of keeping those bikes out of the West TSA. That whole trail system is interconnected. And if you think mountain bikers are going to ignore, close the mountain bike signs, you're a pretty naive person. That's my first point. The second point is I think there's an error in the staff memo, or at least a bias that's contained in there. It shows that online survey results and in-field survey results vary a lot. And I think that's because mountain bikers and younger people are used to doing online survey, used to using the internet. Hikers tend to be an older group and they don't use the internet, don't respond to surveys. So I think there's some staff suggestion that they're going to move to online surveys without field surveys. I want to caution that that's going to lead you to biased data and biased decision-making results. It seems like the staff and the new term these days is multimodal. It sounds nice, sounds like you can make everybody happy, but it's proved not to be true. Wherever mountain bikes have been allowed on hiking trails, the hikers leave. It's just unpleasant to be approached by fast bikes, and so it's a fallacy to think that mountain bikes can be allowed on and not disrupt the historic users, which have been hikers. So please don't fall for multimodal language to suggest that bikers and hikers can share the same trail. Finally, thank you for your service to our community. You spent a lot of time. We appreciate your efforts.
Okay, next is Wendy Sweet, followed by Linda Andes George, and then Carl Ford.
Good evening, trustees and staff. My name is Wendy Sweet, and I'm the Executive Director of the Boulder Mountain Bike Alliance. First, I'd like to thank staff for the work that has gone into the multimodal assessment project. The combination of intercept surveys, online engagement, and structured evaluation framework provides a thoughtful foundation for the next phase of the assessment. One of the findings that stood out to me was the consistent interest in better trail connections and safer ways for people to access OSMP without driving. As an organization that advocates for trail access and connectivity, that's where BMA sees the greatest opportunity. I was particularly interested to see strong support for improved access from the north and east. These opportunities are worth exploring, but they face significant challenges. Northward connections quickly run into difficult terrain and existing trail constraints around Sanitas and Flagstaff. The East Boulder Trail concept has been discussed for decades and still remains in the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan, but if it were simple, we would have completed it by now. That's why I encourage staff and the board to seriously consider opportunities in the South. If the goal is to improve connectivity and reduce vehicle trips, South Boulder appears to be one of the most achievable opportunities available today. The trails already exist. The need for better connections is well understood. The West TSA already identified and approved a reroute of both Lower Big Bluestem and South Boulder Creek West. Compared to some other concepts, much of the groundwork has already been done. In addition, BMA has never advocated for opening every trail in South Boulder to bicycle use. Our position has consistently been that there should be a connected route available to cyclists while recognizing that other trails can remain hiking only. This does not have to be an all or nothing decision. As you move forward into the solution phase, I encourage you to focus on projects that improve connectivity, help people access OSMP without getting in a car, and can be realistically implemented. From that perspective, South Boulder deserves serious consideration. Thank you for your time.
Next is Linda Andes George, followed by Carl Ford, and then Andrew Feeney. Linda, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Many warm thanks to staff for digging into this multimodal city project. In my opinion, it's not an open space issue, but actually a transportation one. I could see by the prep packet that you generated that you had worked really hard to find data to illuminate the discussion. Good for you, but more issues remain cloudy. I'd like to summarize my written comments to the board. Number one, I oppose opening more tranquil trails in the south and western part of the system to bike traffic. I believe from experience that the frontage road to Marshall Mesa is safe to bike users, even young ones, especially given the recent improvements at on Marshall Road. Number two, I appreciate that staff did 2 types of survey outreach, but before August, I want to ask you to please emphasize the value of the in-person intercept surveys. It's far too easy for online surveys to be hijacked by constituents with a particular frame of mind. 3, 1,000 people in a survey seems like a lot, but compared to actual visitation numbers, it's a drop in the bucket. Can we greatly increase these numbers in the next round, perhaps by using volunteer surveyors? 4, the cyclists I've met on the trails are usually nice and polite, and with a few exceptions, obey trail etiquette. I remain convinced that biking is not compatible with preserving healthy ecosystems, nor with the following user groups: slow walkers, fast hikers, the many folks with headsets or earbuds, the disabled, bouncy but inattentive little kids, people who are hard of hearing, tiptoeing wildlife watchers, even distracted dog walkers. These groups tend to quickly avoid using bike-friendly trails, and yet these groups are in the large majority of users. Fifth, I concur wholeheartedly with the comments of our Audubon Society and a nature group that you are going to hear from. If we are able to retain any natural areas and wildlife, it will be thanks to them. And thank you to all of you, and good night.
Next is Carl Ford, followed by Andrew Feeney and then Kate Rao.
Again, like everybody else, thank you for this opportunity. I took the online survey and I found it biased towards local users and bikers. OSMP really is a statewide and national hiking destination worthy of, I would say, national park status. I have been coming to OSMP lands for much of my adult life, and I've only lived in Boulder County for 4 years. So there are a lot of people who come from out of town, and this the survey was really did not at all consider or address those folks. So, and if reducing greenhouse gases is the goal, why focus on opening hiker trails to bikers? There are other options. For instance, you could waive parking fees for EVs and carpools, for instance. Another one might be that, for instance, the Fairview High School kids could use bike trailers in connection with a bus driver. I thought the staff report placed unfair emphasis on that online survey compared to the intercept surveys and really wasn't constructed to query hiker values. I come to, if you didn't already guess, I come to hiking OSMP for the world-class scenery, the hiking, and the ecology. The Colorado Natural Heritage Program rated the South Boulder and Channahon grasslands as very high biodiversity significance, and it has rare plants and butterflies. It is also designated by the state of Colorado as the Colorado Tallgrass Prairie Natural Area, and you can only get designated that way. Among the criteria are statewide significance and exemplary management to conserve that feature. And so I think OSMP has made a commitment towards protecting and conserving that feature, and I want to see it continued. It was mentioned also earlier that it's managed for off-trail closures during grassland birds nesting season. So it is an important area for grassland birds as well as the vegetation. So for these reasons, the South Boulder grassland should be designated a habitat conservation area, in my opinion. You already have a bunch of HCAs, but this one seems to be particularly suited for that designation. And also that it remain hiker only. I have hiked a lot, all around the country and the world, for many, many years. And I've encountered mountain bikers many, many times. And my experience is not only some of the conflicts that, am I out of time?
Oh, finish your thought.
Just that there's a lot of conflict with safety and a lot of conflicts with the trail itself. If you go to Hall Ranch and take a look at what's been done there, what used to be a 2-foot wide trail is now 8 feet wide with jumps and swoops and all sorts of other stuff. I don't think that's compatible with this area. Thanks.
Next is Andrew Feeney, followed by Kate Rao and then Alan Carpenter.
Hi, thanks for your time. Appreciate you. I'm Andy Feeney. I teach science at Fairview High School, and I'm also the head coach of the mountain bike team. 9 months ago, I came here and spoke about the need for safe bicycle access through the open space to connect South Boulder with Dowdy Draw Trailhead. And today I'm here to reiterate that request and emphasize that this issue remains unresolved despite the clear and ongoing need. The young riders on my team represent the next generation of trail stewards in our town. They are outdoor enthusiasts and community members who care deeply about Boulder's open space system. While I appreciate the improvements that have been made to mountain bike access over the years, the lack of a practical bike connection from South Boulder to Dowdy Draw forces many riders to either drive to the trailhead or navigate less safe alternatives. Recent survey data shows the desire for more neighborhood access points and improving trail connectivity in the South Boulder area. Dowdy Draw remains one of the higher used trailheads that people commonly access by car. Providing a bike connection would not only improve safety, but also support Boulder's goals of reducing vehicle trips and encouraging sustainable transportation options. Most importantly, I think this is a safety issue. Crossing the road to get to the new Marshall Trailhead is dangerous. Cars are traveling at a high rate of speed with limited sight distance. After work and after school, when most people are out there riding, cars are backed up beyond the crosswalk, making visibility even harder. This is an accident waiting to happen. There are safer options. We're not asking for a new trail construction or major infrastructure investments. We're asking for bicycle access on existing trails or a trail that would provide a safer connection for youth riders, families, and community members traveling to and from Dowdy Draw. The need is clear. The solution is available. I respectfully ask that the board to take action to establish safe bicycle access through open space in Dowdy Draw. Our community has waited long enough. Let's get this done. Thank you for your time.
Next is Kate Rao, followed by Alan Carpenter and Robin Savage.
Hello, my name's Kate Rao. Thank you to the open space. I've lived in Boulder for 44 years. So mountain biking was banned the year that I got a mountain bike in Chautauqua, which totally made sense. Absolutely. And I greatly appreciate all the data and the work in the community engagement that open space continues to have. And yet, for over 15 years, the mountain bike community has worked tirelessly to come up with solutions for a South Boulder connection. And despite what people think about the West TSA process, I was involved in it, and it was very contentious, and it was divisive in whether you were a hiker or a mountain biker. You couldn't be both, which I am both. Trail runner, mountain biker, hiker. And I strongly encourage the Open Space Board to continue to find a solution and get it done, because we have been holding the reins for kids and people to access this small section of trails. And I believe that the solution is here. You guys have looked at it, and I encourage you to go with your vote that you had made 9 months ago. Thank you very much for your time.
Next is Alan Carpenter, followed by Robin Savage, and then Gerard Kelly.
Good evening. My name is Alan Carpenter. I've lived in Boulder for 38 years. One of the reasons my wife and I moved to Boulder was its bike-friendly nature. We've ridden our bikes around Boulder ever since we've been here. I ride my bike for recreation and to go to the store. I rode my bike over here tonight. I'm saving gasoline that way. I also love Boulder's open space and mountain parks and its many trails. One of my favorite activities is walking along the Mesa Trail from Chautauqua to the South Boulder Creek Trailhead. If the students are allowed to use that last quarter mile of the Mesa Trail going downhill, somebody's going to get hurt right away, in my opinion. In spite of being an avid cyclist, I oppose allowing bicycles on open space south of Shanahan Ridge down to the South Boulder Creek trailhead. I don't want to walk along these trails, having to look over my shoulder to see if a bike's coming, if I want to step across and look at a flower. I've ridden my bikes in town enough to know that it's so easy for a biker to say passing, but in my personal experience, about maybe 75% of the bicyclists that have passed me, they don't say anything. They don't ring their bell. They don't do anything. I anticipate that that would probably be true if bikes were allowed south of Shanahan down to South Boulder Creek. Somebody's going to get hurt. Also, I think it would just detract from the beauty and the peacefulness of hiking those trails. I don't want to really walk on a trail where I'm going to have the company of bicyclists. I also believe that the idea of unsafe connection to the Dowdy Draw trailhead, I've ridden that on my bicycle many, many times along 93. I didn't realize it was so unsafe. I don't think it's really a safety issue in my opinion. So thank you for being willing to hear our voices this evening, and I hope that you decide that the South Boulder Creek area really doesn't merit bicycles. Thank you.
Next is Robin Savage, followed by Gerard Kelly and Alan Feinberg. Robin, if you're here, you can come up to the podium. Okay, we'll come back to Robin. Next is Gerard Kelly, followed by Alan Feinberg and then Patricia Billing.
Good evening, everybody. Jared Kelly. I'm on the board of the Boulder County Nature Association, and I live in Boulder. I'm here to talk about the South Boulder grasslands. We talked about the designations and the importance. I won't go into those details, but it's a special area. And, you know, this natural resource has been acknowledged by the Boulder County, no, by the Boulder community as an area needing preservation. And in 2011, its trails were designated by the city as part of the West Trail Study Area planning process for pedestrian use only. Boulder County Nature Association supports mountain biking on many trails within the city and the county. We value recreation on public lands and recognize the need for a connection. However, we strongly oppose changing the current designation to add other users on the grassland trails. The biodiversity of the area is too sensitive to add other user groups. The cumulative environmental impacts would increase significantly. There also could be hiker-biker conflicts. During the 2011 planning process, various opportunities for the biking community in the area were agreed upon. In addition, other trails were designated for equestrian and dog use. Therefore, we request the city and other stakeholders to develop alternatives for mountain bikers to access Dowdy Draw and other bike permitted trails. Also allowing additional trails in the South grasslands will increase habitat fragmentation. That is, you know, parallel trails. So please maintain the current pedestrian-only designation that was meant to protect the Colorado tall grass prairie natural area. Thank you.
Next is Alan Feinberg, followed by Patricia Billing and Hazel Gordon. Alan, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Good evening, trustees. I'm Alan Feinberg, and I'm speaking as Plan Boulder Chair and as a former OSBT member from 2004 to 2014. I wanted to speak to you tonight about the challenges of finding trail connections within the OSMP system. This based on my experience as a trustee during the West TSA planning process. The West TSA plan took 2 years and was notable as one of the city's most in-depth and complete public processes. A community collaborative group with 14 OSMP users, from recreationists to conservationists to neighbors, met from September 2009 through January 2011 and used a consensus process with many trade-offs to create a balanced package of agreements with one outcome dependent on another, and it cannot be easily changed without unraveling those interwoven agreements. The CCG could not reach consensus on mountain bike trails, so OSBT worked with staff to craft recommendations for mountain bike trail connections to the west, came up with Eldo to Walker Ranch and Chapman Drive, and another trail in Boulder Canyon to connect to the Batasso Trail. OSBT accepted all the other recommendations that were made by the CCG. The reason it's been difficult to find mountain biking trails west of Broadway between El Dorado Springs and Linden Avenue is that the trails in this area were already very heavily used by hikers, dog walkers, and runners at the time of the West TSA, and the use has greatly increased since then. In addition to the heavy use, there are constraints concerning trail use and maintenance, ecological impacts, and parking and enforcement, such as significant existing backlog of OSMP trail and facility maintenance requirements, ecological impacts of added mountain bike use to the west to east drainages, and fragmentation of the high-quality grassland block between Greenbrier Boulevard and South Boulder Creek, and the need for added enforcement with the addition of new trails. OSBT certainly came to understand the limits in our open space system through the West TSA planning process, and I hope I've been able to convey some of the important limitations to you as you consider possible new trail connections. Thank you very much for the opportunity to make comments on this issue.
Next is Patricia Billing, followed by Hazel Gordon and Crystal Gray.
Thank you. My name is Patricia Billig. I've lived here since '83 and been an avid user of open space. In fact, that's why I moved here. And in the staff memo with the packet tonight, the topic of increasing bike connectivity within the OSMP system is mentioned, and it's a reasonable goal, and I don't disagree with it. However, most hikers, as you've heard, and myself included, are strongly opposed to adding a bike trail through the South TSA. You've already heard some good reasons. I hope I'm not repeating too many of them, but and I won't repeat some of them, but you've heard a lot of valid reasons. One, and to me the most important, is there's already a bike connection to the Dowdy Draw area that does not require crossing Broadway. And that has to be really clear. You guys must know about that alternative, which involves 2 underpasses built at great cost to the city. I don't know how much, but, and in all these discussions, I'm amazed with how much the city's trails that have been built for bikes are discounted, you know, as somehow you have to be on a trail with a mountain bike instead of city. And I think, so there is a connection, and it's safe, and you don't have to cross Broadway with kids. I happen to be the chair of the board, of your board here, when we did the TSA. So I'm very familiar with what a lot of people have said, and all that went into this decision to make the West TSA a bike-free area, which Alice Allen just said, the use there has just increased over time. The other thing is, once you let bikes into the West TSA, you can't control them. I live in that area and I see bikes at night out there around the Mesa Trail. And even in the middle of winter, I can see the bike lights bouncing along and, on the fat tire bikes going on the snow on trails. You can't, it's really hard to control. And it's hard for OSMP to do that, I know. And why are the voices of bikers so prominent? It's because as you know, I mean, it's a highly organized group. They can swamp these surveys. The fact you've got to keep the trails intercept surveys as well as the online surveys because it's going to be misleading otherwise and not really fair and not really accurate. Finally, I've seen dog walkers really improve since the 80s. That it's been orders of magnitude since with courteousness towards non-dog walkers and just responsibility on wildlife. How's this for a concept? Have you ever seen a biker stop, get off their bike and walk around hikers? Never. And it's never going to happen. And bikers don't want it to happen. And so that's one of the reasons to keep these uses separate.
Next is Hazel Gordon, followed by Crystal Gray, and then Bev Baker.
As you mentioned, my name is Hazel Gordon, and I've been hiking and running on the city's trails for roughly 2 decades, a total of that anyway. So I don't apologize for repeating what other people have said. It just shows how much we hold these issues passionately. Thank you, though, for your hard work in having a comprehensive and time-intensive approach to the multimodal transportation issue. However, I would like to comment on the biases, as others have also done, in using public surveys to inform policymaking decisions. Boulder City's statistically valid master plan survey and city staff, according to the on-site intercept survey that was available, indicate that OSMP has a significant majority of hiking and walking recreationists using those trails, some of whom are undoubtedly older, as many of us have seen, or older and less agile residents. Many of us older people stop, as people have noted, frequently to take photographs, to watch butterflies, to watch birds, take in the views, or simply to catch our breath. Bicyclists often do not give us warnings of their approach and do not usually walk their bikes around us out of respect. So it is important to use on-site surveys or other means of capturing pedestrians' views, not just online surveys, as other people have noted. For example, you could target senior hiking groups, such as the one I participate in, for our opinions on trail usage, as we're at the trailheads. Please note that my group uses 12-person vans to take us to and from trail locations to avoid using our personal vehicles. Additional input from trail users might be obtained from some of the many hiking and running groups, such as the Boulder Ramblers, the Colorado Mountain Club people, the Boulder Trail Runners, and certain meetup groups that use the open space trails for their views on carpools and van transportation to trailheads. Some of these groups were probably unaware of the public opinion surveys. I hope that contacting a wider network of trail users will engage a broader population that regularly use the open space trails. This wider outreach effort will undoubtedly provide more information for your recommendations on trail transportation and uses from the pedestrians that make up the majority of OSMP users. Thank you.
Next is Crystal Gray, followed by Bev Baker, and then Tom Burkle.
Hi, I'm Crystal Gray. Oh, hi, Harmon. We served on planning board together. Um, I I've lived in Boulder since 1969. We were students, so do I win here? That's 57 years. But and I was on the Open Space Board of Trustees. Our big issue was pesticides on open space, and we said they can't be used, and I don't think that's ever been repealed. But on this issue, the multimodal connectivity, um, when council heard that, I was on council, our final hearing was held at Boulder High School. And as one of the women that spoke about BNA issues mentioned, things were contentious among all the different groups. I don't know if you have horses thrown into this mix, but we had horses and all different levels of mobility for whether you're walking or riding your riding bikes or whatever, and including horse people and then dogs. So we we listened to everybody. We came up with what we felt would address Boulder's values as well as sustainability of the system. And right now you have several 100,000 more users. You have everybody wanting a piece of your budget, even the wildfire um, groups that want to create funds for residents of the city of Boulder. So I'm encouraging you to continue this discussion. Here's an idea I had, the Marshall Mesa frontage road. Why not make that one way with bikes going two ways? Do some things like that. That'll make that safer. Heck, we cut through there on the way home from Costco just because it's so scenic. And I've thought about that. And there's not one time when you don't have bikes traveling along. So that's just my suggestion. I thought Alan Feinberg made a lot of really good points, as a lot of the speakers. And I do want to say BNA does walk their talk. I attended their trail building. I've still got something they sent us about this thick on sustainable trail building, and they've been really good about participating. So I just wanted to say it might have been contentious, but when you get to know people one-on-one, so try to get out there with as many groups as you can before you make this big decision. Okay, thank you.
Next is Bev Baker, followed by Tom Burkle.
Good evening, trustees and staff. I'm Bev Baker, speaking for Boulder County Audubon Society. First, I hope you had a chance to read our email about Agenda Item 5B, exploring a city charter amendment to add wildfire resilience language to open space purposes, and why we believe it's not necessary. The rest of our comments are about the multimodal assessment. As I've spoken about before, we value protecting wildlife and ecosystems on OSMP lands and preserving places for visitors to enjoy quiet activities such as observing nature. A number of our members were involved in the West TSA planning process, and we support the outcome of the years of work that went into the plan. This includes the Shanahan and South Mesa subarea, where the Colorado Tallgrass Prairie State Natural Area is located, that's been mentioned before tonight. This area supports multiple species of rare declining grassland nesting birds, plants, and pollinators. And I'd like to make a few points from the engagement window 1 summary in your packet. First, as has been mentioned, results differ between the in-person intercept survey and online questionnaire, with the intercept surveys capturing more pedestrians than the online questionnaire. Therefore, we agree with some previous speakers that the August engagement window should include in-person intercept surveys in addition to an online questionnaire to be consistent with engagement window 1. Second, there appears to be an inconsistency between figure 1 and text language that follows it. This is getting very specific. The first sentence of the first paragraph under figure 1 contains the phrase increasing bike connectivity within the system, which does not appear to match any of the categories in figure 1. So we'd like to see the phrase either deleted or clarified as to how it relates to figure 1. And third, the table at the bottom of PDF page 13 with the evaluation criteria. If emissions are used as evaluation criteria, then we believe that each potential solution should include an estimate of emissions saved. Thank you for the opportunity to comment this evening.
Next is Tom Burkle.
Good evening. My name is Tom Burkle. Thank you for letting me speak today. Adding bicycle access to trails starting within the city will be placing a new use on heavily used trails. This will likely lead to higher levels of conflict and/or displaced trail users. Opening these trails to bicycles is likely to attract riders of e-motos onto those trails. Even though they aren't legal anywhere, e-motos are now prevalent on boulder bike paths, sidewalks, and streets. Trailheads that start in the city with an icon that shows cycles are allowed is sufficiently ambiguous that it is inevitably that some of these kinds of uses will occur. Just as videos showing Boulder police trying and failing to stop an e-moto, it will almost be impossible for the 2 or 3 OSMP rangers on duty to deal with this issue, and it's unfair to put the rangers in that position. While I don't doubt the commitment to the trail stewardship of the cyclists here today, the problem of allowing new uses on trails is that the trails are available to all takers, and not everybody cares as much about open space. It is difficult to make people do the right thing. Sometimes the problem is relatively low stakes misbehavior. For example, the amount of dog poo in plastic bags left on trails. But having riders mobbing down heavily used trails, potentially on e-motos, the stakes are much higher. The city adopted Vision Zero as part of the Transportation Master Plan to minimize the dangers of travel. I encourage you to consider that as you make these choices. Thank you.
Next, if you're joining online and would like to speak, you can go ahead and raise your hand. And we have a hand from Lynn Siegel. Lynn, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yes. On September 8th, Rachel Friend lied that I followed and pushed her and collaborated with Jessica Benjamin, that I followed Jessica. There's an extensive investigative report by the police that is completely fabricated. I have, Crystal's been here since 59. I've actually been here since 59 too, and 60. My mom was exposed to plutonium from the 57 fire and died 12 years later on Mercer Island. So I've been around too. And I've never had anything like this with Rachel Friend. I was just stunned when this was 4 days after Laura Gonzalez was charged with a felony for an argument with Matt Benjamin. The report says, for example, allegedly used her arm and elbow to physically push Rachel aside in an attempt to interject herself into the conversation. Jessica stated that Rachel verbally objected.
Lynn, do you have something to say? Are your comments related to open space issues?
Excuse me. This is my 3 minutes.
Please
Do
keep your
not
comments to open
interrupt.
space issues, Lynn. Thank you.
It is to open space issues. Okay, you want to know what Rachel Friend did with Sam Weaver? She came to Open Space Board of Trustees, to Hal Hallstein, to solicit land use issue provisions on CU South. This is a huge deal. This is political retaliation. And I don't want to be interrupted by the likes of you. No way. I did not even get near Jessica or Rachel, other than showing them my sign, which they didn't like, because Rachel is opposed to municipalization, and it was about municipalization. And it was also stolen. The sign was stolen. And then, yes, I was irritated. I was asking everyone, where did my sign go? And they blame me for being irritated that my sign was taken. At one point, she said, Hope you vomit your food out. Seriously. This is so not okay. She's running for our county treasurer position. I have never had anything like this happen. This is so unacceptable. And you know what's really unacceptable is the growth in this place, because that's why you have all the mountain bike issues with hikers. And that's why we have so much use on all these trails with Sundance.
If you're joining online and would still like to speak, you can raise your hand. I'm not seeing any other hands.
I think there might be some speakers in the audience that still might like to speak.
Oh, yes. Okay. Thank you.
And I think Karen pulled time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Dan.
Just for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Several people have mentioned the heavy use on especially on the South Mesa Trail. And I have some numbers from the OSMP Human Resources staff that I thought might be useful to you. At the time of the West TSA, there were 80,000 visits in that part of the southern system. And in 2025, 123,000 visitors were in that part of the system. So like with Chautauqua and other Sanitas, other popular places in the open space system, this part of the open space system is also experiencing a huge increase in visitation. I know that you're all aware that our public lands are experiencing that more broadly. The Forest Service just announced increasing fees to try to control the numbers on Mount Sneffels. Boulder County is trying to use timed entries and during the week. Rocky Mountain National Park uses reservations. But without those kinds of options for controlling numbers, the city chose during the West TSA process to not make this part of the system available to bikers and to use that as a way to control numbers in this part of the system. So I hope you'll respect that as this work moves forward. And thank you.
I did just want to come back to see if Robin Savage has joined. Okay. No other hands are up online either.
Okay. Thank you. With that, we'll close public comment and move on to matters from the board. There weren't any written items in the packet today, but are there any things that you all would like to react to from the public comment or anything else you'd like to bring up?
Yeah. Oh, I would just like to compliment Right Relationship Boulder for the way that they broke up their presentation and handled the different points that they wanted to make through multiple visitors to the dais, and I think that it's an effective way of communicating with boards. If you have a group and you want to say more than you can say in 3 minutes to do it like that, so appreciate that.
I did appreciate the comments about Fort Chambers, and I'm very happy to be a trustee during this time as we're doing the planning, and definitely concur with a lot of the comments personally that I heard. I think they were really great comments.
Yeah, Harmon, I agree. I was going to call out Right Relationship with Native Peoples Boulder too. Your comments were great. The way you presented was great, very organized, very professional. So well done. And it's just it's an honor to have so many people, and I would call them heavy hitters from Boulder politics, show up and speak in a manner that I can tell is trying to support us to do our jobs well. So I appreciate that very much. A few other thoughts. The improvement in the dog walking, it was the green tag program. So I don't know if this is mostly a joke, but maybe we can get a green tag program for the mountain bikers. Just a thought. But seriously, I first came to Boulder politics in the West TSA process, and not to cast any shade on the people who are working so hard on that, and it was a very difficult thing. That was what motivated me to get involved in Boulder politics, and one of the main reasons why I'm on this board right now is I went to one of the most contentious hearings when I recently moved here, and I just thought it was not what we're looking for with public discourse and decision making. And I just thought we can do better as a community. And so, while I honor all those who did that and the decision making that came out of it, I don't view that necessarily, especially when it comes to the mountain bike issue and other things, as being necessarily this great public process. That being said, I appreciate all the comments everybody made, and I assure you that we'll do our best to deliberate on this issue. And I wanted to make one other comment, then if you had something to add. Dan, when there's the issue of fairness in the survey comes up, and could you just comment, when we're asking for public input, is it a vote?
Is the survey?
Are we taking, if more people say yes to the mountain bike connector than no, is that determinative?
Oh, I think the surveys, the Intercept survey, the questionnaires are one, avenues of input into formulating recommendations.
Right, but it is not a vote, is what my point. And
yeah,
so
no, it's not a vote. And I think that Casey and Jenna would be more than happy to elaborate on some others, the differences in the survey said, but no, to answer your question, it's not a vote.
Yeah, just wanted to address that. Did you have something?
I assume we'll talk more about this topic because it's up next on the agenda, right? Yeah, I just wanted to confirm that. Okay, great. Then I have no more comments for now.
Harmon, anything else?
No, just really, really thank you for the way you framed that last piece. Appreciate that.
All right. First time as chair. Here we go. So I think that's it, Dan, and now we'll move on to matters from the department. And we're going to move on to matters from the department. Thanks again for all the great comments. Go ahead, Dan.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for everybody for showing up. Some really, really great, powerful comments tonight. And also thank you everybody who's been providing some written comments. Right Relationship Boulder, I thought was a very impressive set of comments that staff is deliberating on and sifting through. So yeah, thanks to everybody for their time tonight. Yeah, we have 3 items from matters from the department tonight. We're going to start with where the momentum was at during public comment, and that is on the to update you all on our multimodal assessment. Sort of primarily, we're here to update you on the phase that was just completed in terms of the public engagement window, but also to give you a sneak peek in the next steps that are upcoming in terms of starting to develop solutions and criteria for how we would look at analyzing all the solutions and ideas that get developed and sort of our next steps in that regard. So with that, we have Jenna Van Guren, Senior Planner, and Casey French, our Senior Planner Manager, who are, Casey, you're pretty much supporting tonight. I think Jenna's going to run us through the presentation. So turn things over to Jenna.
Thank you. Is this on?
It is now.
Awesome. Thank you. Give me 1 second to pull this up. Alrighty. That is up there. All right. Thank you everyone for taking the time to listen to this presentation. Today I'm going to be talking about the multimodal improvements assessment that was previously noted as Citywide Strategic Plan 7C. My name is Jenna Van Gerwen and I am Open Space Principal Planner with OSMP. And for today, I'm going to be giving an overview of the project and where we are now, I'll be talking about the engagement window 1 summary, which will include some information about the in-person intercept survey, the online questionnaire, and then some key findings and themes that emerged across both of those engagement efforts. And then I will talk about the evaluation framework and provide an overview of that and some major evaluation categories that will be used to assess potential multimodal solutions moving forward. And then finally, some next steps, specifically as they pertain to this group and the board. So just to start, I wanted to pull up the timeline, or a high-level timeline. And just as a reminder, we started this back in 2025 when we brought some background research and started conducting the assessment. We then, at the beginning of 2026, started exploring preliminary opportunities using research and on-the-ground expertise and data. Where we currently are is kind of coming to a close and finishing up phase 2 of the project, which is where that second check mark is, and what we are going to be presenting right now with engagement window 1 and the overview of that, and then the data summary. So there were the two methods. There was the intercept survey and the online questionnaire. And for the in-person intercept survey, there were 1,073 surveys that were collected. The locations for those included hiker only, multi-use trails, trailheads, access points, and those represented a variety of recreation settings across the system and were designed to reduce that self-selection bias and better understand representative opinions for people who visit on a day-to-day basis. On the other hand, we had the online questionnaire that was posted to Be Heard Boulder for 3 weeks for the latter half of April and shared through a City of Boulder press release, OSMP social media channels and outlets, OSMP e-newsletters, and additional outreach efforts, and that received about 1,015 responses. Now, to get into the data of what ended up being a bit over 2,000 responses. So how visitors currently access OSMP. We have a lot of data that already exists around this, specifically with our POVs 2021 to 2023 data, but we're still going to ask it through this effort. And some of the main takeaways you see here, especially in that first line, when asked how people got there today, when asked the question in the survey or during the past 12 months, was that personal vehicle remains the dominant access mode, with walking and biking, traditional biking, as the next most common modes. One takeaway was that specifically in the intercept survey, there was a question that asked, if all modes were equally easy, would you still take your same transportation mode? 69% of people did say yes, but among those people who did choose a different mode, 30% selected that they would bike instead if it was equally easy, and 27% said that they would take public transportation. A reminder for this project and its scope, public transportation is out of scope for OSMP, but this is really helpful knowledge to keep in mind for future planning efforts. Moving into visitor activity types for how people were recreating either that day or how they recreated primarily over the past 12 months was in the intercept survey, that primarily captured hikers and walkers. In the online questionnaire, it included substantially more cyclists, and I think that can speak to the self-selection. That is something that I think a lot of people have kind of already noticed, but that is something that's going to be noted throughout this entire summary, that there's more favor towards cyclist access in the questionnaire. And I think that kind of gets to what does this mean? And it's essentially that we're getting a better understanding of who could be interested in this project and what cyclists, like specifically what their preferences could be. But as seen in the intercept survey that captures typical visitation, that they do tend to make up less of the representation on the day-to-day. For barriers to multimodal access and what's preventing people from leaving the car behind, both the survey and the questionnaire had the same top 2 answers of trails are too far away or it takes too long to get here without a car. and there are not enough connected trails, bike paths, or transit stops. For the survey, the third answer was it is too difficult to travel with children, dogs, or gear. And the questionnaire, it was there are gaps in trail connections that allow bikes. I think the key theme here was that visitors consistently have identified physical connectivity and overall ease of travel as significant factors influencing transportation choice. And this is just to show the rest of the barriers. I realize that that's probably very hard to read what any of those say. But the one that's circled is I feel unsafe walking or biking around vehicle traffic, and is just mostly speaking to safety, as that's something that's pretty large in like the aspect of multimodal transportation. Just to show that that's still ranked pretty high, especially in the online questionnaire, but in the grand scheme was about 5th in the Intercept survey. Now, to get into the bulk of what we were trying to ask in the questionnaire and the survey were the strategy questions. So, how likely, if at all, would you be to travel to OSMP without a personal vehicle if the following strategies were implemented? So, there were the 3 buckets, and that's trail connections and allowed uses. There's trailheads and access points, and there's education and outreach. So this section is trail connections and allowed uses. And below what you see here is for each strategy on the bottom, on the left is the survey, and on the right is the questionnaire for each of these. Can I get a pointer? Yes, I can. Yep, that you can see that, just to help with some orienting. And then the red is showing not at all likely, with the blue showing extremely likely. So the most supported strategies that we're seeing here and the trail connections and allowed uses were connections from existing paths and sidewalks, trail connections within OSMP, and allowing bikes on specific trails where currently prohibited, which in turn does increase bike connectivity. And something to note here is that allowing bikes on trails received more of a mixed response between the 2 engagement methods. An interesting takeaway that we got here when looking at what user groups could be most likely to change behavior with was traditional bikers are moderately or extremely likely to arrive without a vehicle. As shown here, it's between 68 and 90% with the 2 different engagement methods. And that's stating that they would make the mode shift if these 3 top strategies were implemented, which is more than a majority. And a reason why this could work is because they're relatively close by, as shown on the graph here. So of those who arrived by vehicle and said their preference mode is bike, most, which is about 88%, which is showing in these 3 categories to the left, traveled 20 minutes or less to the trail, which may indicate a willingness to shift modes if the infrastructure is there. So just showing a willingness for the behavior change. Moving into trailheads and access points, we're seeing here that the strategy is focused on providing convenient access as well as improving comfort and convenience. At trailheads, access points may be the most effective at encouraging visitors to travel to OSMP without a personal vehicle. The most supported strategies across both were more neighborhood access points, restrooms, shade structures, and then bike racks. And then finally, with education and outreach related to shifting behavior, we had our most supported strategies as providing or improving web maps, wayfinding signage, and real-time travel time / parking information at trailheads. And what you can kind of see here is there's a lot more red versus blue, so less likely versus more likely. And there's less support overall or indication of behavior change in this bucket. But I think that the main takeaway and theme that we can see here is that visitors value practical trip planning information, that they may be more willing to choose multimodal travel when they have access to clear navigation tools and information related to that. So the takeaway there is the top 5 overall strategies that were ranked most likely or somewhat likely, ranked in this order were: first, make key trail connections within the OSMP trail system; second, make key trail connections from existing paths and sidewalks to OSMP trails; third, create more neighborhood access points; fourth, allow bikes on specific trails where currently prohibited to connect to other multi-use trail areas; and then fifth was a even tie between make targeted safety improvements to access trails and add restrooms to more locations. So we had representation primarily from the 2 buckets of trail connections and then the trailheads and access points. And then here we have the preliminary opportunity areas that we highlighted in both the survey and the questionnaire. And so as you can see, there was overall support for all of the opportunity areas and strategies, with each strategy receiving more than 60% combined support and strongly support responses across both the survey and the questionnaire. So these results do suggest broad public openness, at least, to the proposed concepts. The strongest support we're seeing is in the north and the east, which align with those earlier findings showing interest in enhanced trail connectivity and access. We do also see a lot of support for that South Trail connection in the Shanahan area, but also have comparatively more opposition than the other opportunity areas, particularly in the questionnaire. So with this specific opportunity area, it does alert us that maybe the city may not have as much opposition or knowledge around it, but that the neighbors or specific localized responses in this neighborhood or area might have a stronger sentiment or stronger feelings towards the specific area. Finally, the safety and travel options campaign, and then the improved education and wayfinding in the south, which are the 2 options on the left. This enforces some of those earlier trends as well that we noticed in the education and outreach section, and that visitors value that clear navigation tool set and trip planning resources that can improve the ease of travel to get there. I think the last thing really to note on this is that we're still seeing a lot of these yellow responses, which is representative of neutral. So it did represent a meaningful portion of feedback for several strategies, which suggested that while many respondents were supportive of these concepts, some may still be undecided or interested in additional details that would come with implementation or impacts that would come with these or strategies. So I think overall what kind of came from the survey and the questionnaire and what we heard in the emerging themes was that connectivity is a primary barrier and also a large opportunity area. Safety does remain an important consideration. Visitors support practical and on-the-ground multimodal improvements. Interest varies by user group and recreation type, and opportunity areas generally received broad support. Before moving into the next section, I did want to highlight that we will be having a Power BI dashboard that will be available online. It's not online yet, but it will be either later this week or next week. We're just figuring out a few more things on it. But essentially how this tool will work is you can see down here, there's cross filtering that will be available. And what that means is based on mostly the demographics, you'll be able to filter how people answer different questions and whether people supported things based on how they answered. So for example, if people arrived by walking, you can see how they answered specific questions related to the preliminary opportunity areas, or if they live within Boulder County or outside of the county. So a lot of those questions people have related to data can be answered within the Power BI dashboard. And this will, like I said, probably be available next week at the latest. So it will be a really useful tool to kind of dive into it more if that's something you'd like to do. So diving into the next section and phase 3. So like I noted before, we are pretty much wrapping up phase 2, which was preliminary opportunities and strategies and the first engagement window. And everything we've talked about up until this point has been about broader strategies with some focus into highlighted preliminary opportunity areas that data showed support for. So we're now going to be moving into that next level of detail where those strategies become applied in specific areas as solutions. And what makes them different, for example, is instead of having a strategy as an example, adding more restrooms would make traveling to a trailhead without a vehicle more approachable, which, as we saw, was tied as a 5th top strategy. We would look at that and see what we heard through public input and draft a solution as add a restroom at XYZ to be ran through the multimodal evaluation framework so that ultimately we can have a draft package of solution and bring that forth in our second engagement window in August. So the evaluation framework that we'll be running our solutions through was developed and will be used to evaluate all of the solutions that are not only applied in preliminary opportunity areas, but also system-wide to then come up with a package of solutions that we're going to bring forth to everyone during the engagement window. And the purpose of doing that and running it through an evaluation framework is to ensure a consistent evaluation across the different solutions, to understand the trade-offs associated with them, and to align with OSMP's priorities. The solutions being assessed are going to fall into 5 primary categories. That is solution effectiveness, relating specifically to, is this an effective multimodal solution? Natural resource considerations, agricultural resource considerations, implementation and maintenance, and recreational resource considerations. So what that actually looks like, and diving into that a little bit more, is solution effectiveness will capture items like safety, mode shift potential, which is kind of capturing will people actually change their behavior if these things are implemented, and avoided emissions. So if people change their behavior, what would the avoided emissions of not taking vehicles anymore look like? Natural resources, this is essentially looking at the ecological impact or the environmental impacts that would be associated with a solution if it were to be implemented. Agricultural resources, so essentially the impact on agricultural production or use or the patterns in that. Implementation and maintenance would be looking at feasibility. That essentially captures site conditions and constraints, cultural resource considerations, alignment with existing planning guidance. Operations and maintenance is enforcement, monitoring and staffing. There's costs. And then operational emissions and climate resilience is essentially the durability of a solution, and the operational emissions, once again, just is another way to capture the climate aspect. Finally, in recreational resources, especially with some of these more broad names, we have connectivity and route character, which is more about the feel of the trail, its design parameters, the trail sustainability. We have encounters with others, about potential for user conflict or potential for pleasant interactions on open space, access and awareness, the ability to access, including the neighborhood impact or parking availability, public sentiment, which is another way to just capture public input that comes through engagement windows. And then finally, equity. So just the different, how this impacts different demographics, activity groups, ability to access, and the potential benefits and consequences that can have. Now moving into next steps and how this pertains to the board. So we'll be moving into, and where we are currently is summer 2026. We're developing and we'll be evaluating these solutions within the framework that I've just explained. Come August, we'll have our second engagement window where we'll get public feedback on the draft package of solutions, primarily through an online questionnaire. In September, we will be planning to come back to the board and discuss the findings from engagement window 2. And ultimately, that's where we are, with obviously coming into engagement window 3 with additional touches to come. But essentially, that's where that leaves us, with questions for the board to consider as we move forward. Are there any clarifying questions or reflections on the engagement results? And is the board clear on next steps regarding how the data will inform solution development? So that concludes this, and I open the floor to questions.
Thank you, Jen. Good job. That was great. Oh, you are? Okay. Any questions? No?
This is Morgan. When it's appropriate, I have some questions for Jenna.
Oh, great. Go ahead and thanks for being here virtually.
Yeah, thanks. I'm sorry that I was late, everyone, but Jenna, thanks for the presentation. I really like how you laid everything out, and especially summarized it at the end. Kind of the top 5 are really helpful. Thanks for your work doing that. I have a couple questions. I know the city distinguishes questionnaires from surveys, with the assumption that surveys are statistically valid and questionnaires are more for gathering community input. Can you help me understand why you're using the two different terms for it and what that might mean for either the data collection or the analysis?
Hi, Morgan. This is Casey French. I am the senior manager with for planning at OSMP. We've only done this a couple of times. We did this once prior in e-bikes, and we did it at this during this engagement window too. And it's primarily just to understand like a representative feedback, knowing that when people take a questionnaire, it's often something near and dear to their heart, and you get people who are very invested, but it doesn't necessarily represent maybe a broad spectrum of just users out in the community. And we just find understanding both just helpful inputs into the process. So we can, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Did I interrupt you? I'm on.
No, I think it's a little bit of the connection. You're good.
It is connection. I apologize. Thanks for bearing with me. Is one or the other statistically valid? Would you consider either of them statistically valid?
Yes, the intercept survey is statistically valid.
But that's a concerning for me based on what Jenna said and what was in the memo around the intercept surveys being conducted at hiker only trails. And I understand, I mean, I'm a mountain biker, I'm a hiker, I hike at hiker only trails as well. Is that equitable? And does it capture a diversity of opinions who had an opportunity to chat with staff and take that survey?
Yeah, it was not only at hiker only. I think when I said hiker only, I was trying to emphasize that it was trails where specifically hikers are only allowed. And then there were trails where there were multi-use. So locations included hiker only, comma, multi-use trails, comma. And then there were also specific locations where it was at trailheads and then at access points. So we were capturing the different locations and trying to be representative of the different spots that could be. So we had, for example, there was a site at Marshall Mesa. There was at Dowdy Draw, at Bobolink. So there were a few different spots that did capture the multi-use aspect and not only hiker only.
Yeah, and I do understand that. I heard the comma. By virtue of the fact that it's a hiker only trail, you will not see someone on a mountain bike there, and that's my concern. And I'm concerned also that there's a statistically valid intercept study that opponents of mountain bike connection to Dowdy Draw are using as a reason to justify the fact that the questionnaire might be invalid, or there's claims that the mountain bike community was so organized that they kind of tipped the scales in the favor of mountain bikes on the survey and questionnaire. So that's my statement on that. And I do appreciate trying to reach as many people and types of people as you can. So that's great. And my other question is, would staff consider at all combining both the questionnaire and the survey into one memo, or combining the bar charts or any of the results to have just a clear, more concise picture of how the data you collected in both the questionnaire and the survey might inform the solutions?
We've typically shown them, side by side. We can, do if you did it additively, but I think we would do that alongside showing them, showing the results comparatively, and then you could do an additive. But we typically, just for the benefit of just understanding what user groups are saying are giving what pieces of information, we typically do it a side-by-side comparison. But we could, we could do an additive thing, in addition to, we can add them together. I mean, but we wouldn't represent the findings lump moving forward. Yeah.
Okay. My concern is, and this is not for staff, but more for the community, is if one is statistically valid and one is not, I am concerned that the issue of a mountain bike trail could be questioned just on the basis of process. And what I'm trying to reflect is I see very strong community support. And Jenna, you said this in your top 5 for sheer infrastructure over education and outreach and wayfinding and other kind of community resources to find where they can park or whatnot. I see infrastructure as just above and beyond. I mean, in some of the results, 70+% of individuals who responded are either neutral or supportive or very much in support of the multimodal connections, whether it's on an existing trail or it would be a new build to simply connect safely children and families and well-meaning community members to mountain bike access. So that's one thing. Another item I just want to mention is I want this to be fair for the community, and I'm concerned that a lot of issues and a lot of tension in the community is getting conflated. The interest in multimodal access to trailheads is very important and can accomplish a lot of different objectives that we all have shared interest around. And then there's this one piece of it in terms of access for people who bicycle to more safely reach the places that the city's designated as bicycle-only trails. And I don't have a solution to that problem, but for the record, I want the two almost to stand alone, or to at least be considered on their own merits and not conflated at the expense of safe places for people who want to ride a bicycle to do so. And I think that's it. So I really appreciate staff effort. One more thing, 2,000+ responses is tremendous. So the data you gathered is really informative, and I look forward to more conversation and to the September meeting where we get to continue this. So thank you.
Thanks, Maureen.
I had a few questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to zoom out and ask, this is all related to strategic plan item 7C, is that right? I've lost the plot. What? This is not all about the connector to Dowdy Draw. So what are we ultimately driving for here in this survey? It's not written in the packet. Does somebody have it somewhere?
Yeah, just to give you a brief snapshot from the board's perspective is at the same time the new strategic plan came out, one of the goals was 7C and its sort of goal is how can we encourage more multimodal access to key open space areas and access points? I mean, I'm not phrasing it exactly that way. At the same time, the board raised some interest in hearing about a southern connection. We felt instead of having two processes, that Southern Connection idea fit within the realm of what we were about to embark on, which was that multimodal assessment. And so sort of the energy the board was conveying to staff based on what they were hearing from certain community members about a trail connection. We took the intentionality of sort of embarking in that with the multimodal assessment 7C. So it's
Okay, so they are interconnected, and I'm now remembering. I'm remembering the board retreat when we were putting stickies up there. Okay, so uh, I will leave my comments for the next round when we get to comments. How much of our budget is allocated as we're looking at these solutions? Do we have a ballpark number or budget allocation that we're talking about here? Just to give me a frame of reference.
no.
Okay.
I would say it's likely, if I'm thinking system-wide solutions, very specific site solutions, I would imagine it could be a combination of operating funds and CIP funds.
Okay, all right.
And likely a phased approach depending on the cost of the solution packages or a particular solution.
Jenny Casey, two questions. One is a follow-up from Morgan. Do we, and I think it's, in public comment, there was a lot of insinuation that it was biased towards cyclists, our methodology, and then the cyclists have a different view, or cyclists. And so do we have an idea what percentage of the intercept was from locations where cycling was a possible activity versus not? Do we know that percentage breakdown? And then others have noted that the Mesa Marshall Mesa Trailhead was closed during that time, and so there's a sense, I think, that maybe there was less representation necessarily.
Yeah, let me check. I don't believe Marshall Mesa was closed. It was one of our survey locations.
It was
Yes.
open at that time.
There were 6 sites that were pedestrian only. And I'm gonna actually, Anna, are you online? You might be able to provide a little bit more information in human dimensions.
And I know if we don't know the answer right in the moment, with that Power BI, we can do that
Okay, I
crosstab.
think that
If
would be,
I don't have that
there's members of the
immediately.
public who'd be really interested in having
Right.
that information.
Yeah, we have Anna.
Sure. Hi, my name's Anna Reed, Human Dimension Senior Analyst with OSMP. And yeah, we had 5 sites that were multi-use sites and 6 sites that were pedestrian only. And we picked them to try to get a good distribution, both in terms of number of visitations, just so we could get a good enough sample, spatial distribution, that mix of multimodal pedestrian only, and then a mix of access types, so regional, residential adjacent, and neighborhood. And then, yeah, as was mentioned, we'll be able to look at bikers specifically and hikers specifically at those sites.
Yeah, but do we? And it was N of like 1,000 and change, and we don't know how many 100 were at the multimodal sites versus the hiking sites at the top of our head.
I mean, that's something that we can look up. Yeah, but not off the top.
Maybe not real time during the meeting, but
Yeah.
I think people would be interested in hearing
can look
that
that up.
number. Okay, thanks. That's the first question. And the second one,
And
go ahead,
sorry, actually, it is about like 50-50 or so. There, we had a similar amount of hikers and bikers at the multi-use sites.
Okay. And then I think just a sign of the times. What is a traditional cyclist? This is the first time I've ever heard that term, and it. I mean, I can guess, but can we define the term?
It's just what we call the non-e-bike.
Yeah.
So human powered bicycle.
Yes.
And that could be a road bike, that could be a mountain bike, that could be somebody on one of those unicycles with knobby tires. It just didn't have a motor.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Traditional. Okay, got it. That's my last question. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Any comments or discussion? Sarah?
All right. It's always fun to be the first one to go on these types of discussions. In hearing that multimodal access and the Dowdy Draw connector are now being all wrapped into one conversation, I guess I now live in North Boulder. Both of my kids are Fairview student. Well, one was and one will be. I lived in South Boulder for a long time. I'm familiar with all of those trails, care very much about South Boulder. But now I live in North Boulder, and I'm not hearing any conversation any dialogue right now about the connectors and multimodal access in North Boulder. And it is a growing population up there. It's a lot of families, actually probably younger families. We're going to be in the same exact place, having the same exact conversation with an explosion of families saying, how do I get myself into the rest of the trails of Boulder? Right now, I can tell you we have to go down roadways along through neighborhoods, and then we have to cross, not as major of a road, but in order to access any of the rest of the trails south, we have an issue, and then we do get onto the highway discussion and a lot of safety issues heading north if you're in North Boulder. So if we are going to collapse these things, then I would request that we give equal attention to North and South Boulder. I'm going to put a stake in the ground there. That being said, and also I think we're lacking some clarity, some clear definitions on what is our strategy, why are we doing this, what are our priorities, so that we have that North Star that we can all be looking to. And I think it's going to be really important, especially given the community interest, that we have clear definitions about what we're all working towards to help us make good decisions. I am personally what I wrote down as I was hearing everyone talk and as I've been thinking about this is that we have three key interest groups. We have the bikers, we have the hikers, and we also have Mother Nature. And she's not going to be able to speak, and we have people here speaking on her behalf. But our job at Open Space is to steward and protect these lands and to protect wildlife always. And there's always a balance with recreation and protection. And I think it does keep sticking with me that whatever we decide to do, we need to not be so entitled as a city, as a population, that we think that we forget, that we lose sight of how important the conservation component is. As a mother, with two children, I again, and also a Fairview parent, I can definitely relate specifically on the connector trail conversation. And I think I said this in past meetings, and I still do feel that we need a solution. I heard that there is a solution already, and I want to know what that is. I didn't ask that in the clarifying questions, but I am curious, what is the connector path in the underpass? And some of these things are outside of my purview. So if there is truly a solution, I would like to see that highlighted more. I assume it's not. I assume there are issues with that solution. Otherwise, we wouldn't have such a huge showing. But so I do think that we need to consider safety, and I do think we need to create a connector. At the same time, I am one of those hikers, and I'm one of those dog owners. And though I am only 46 years old, I just went through 6 months of cancer treatment and was one of those very frail people walking on the trails. I've also had hip injury, and I've been frail walking on the trails. And I don't even like it up on Wonderland Lake when people are zooming past me on a bike. I get annoyed. And it's it's paved on portions of that, or it's sidewalk on portions of that. So I think we also absolutely need to protect the hikers on those trails. And I am personally absolutely opposed to opening up existing hiking trails to bikers. I do think we're going to have to, I would really strongly encourage us to look at alternatives and creating very clear distinctions between the biking areas and the hiking areas. And I do believe that we can designate those clearly and keep the lines strongly drawn with an investment in the infrastructure. And so that's why I was asking about what are we talking about in terms of money here? What kind of budgets do we have? Because at the end of the day, that's going to define our capabilities and our reality. And so I think we should start to put some numbers around all of this. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. I'm gonna Morgan, are you still with us? And do you have any comments or discussion with the board?
I do, and I added a couple comments earlier, so I apologize. And I'm about to be there in person, but Actually, I am about to be there in person. I'm on my way. Brady, do you have comments?
Well, well, you'll go last in that case, Harmon.
I'll go last. I'll be there in a sec. Thanks so much.
Okay, so first of all, it's been a really good conversation tonight around this, and I think we did last year really show staff that we were interested in having staff explore the South Boulder connection. We have a large population in Central and South Boulder that are really close to Dowdy Draw, Community Ditch, Spring Brook Loop, all these trails that are open to mountain bikers, but it's sort of hard to get there without driving your car to those trailheads. And so hear what you're saying, Sarah, about North Boulder connections, but I'd hesitate to put more on staff's plate when we've already directed them that this was the priority for looking at how to address 7C this year. So maybe put a stake in the ground next year if this comes up again. But and I know you've been through a lot, and sometimes it's hard to remember everything. But I think this was what the board's direction was for how to address 7C this time around. So,
Harmon, do you mind if I interrupt just briefly on that?
Oh yeah, I mean,
thank you.
You can interrupt.
So this is a system-wide look at now developing possible solutions, and we will be looking at possible solutions in the north. So just wanted to clarify that. Although a lot of the energy from the community and what we've heard in past board conversations has been on a south connection, this is a system-wide look.
So maybe there will be the next year. Sounds good. Yeah, awesome. Okay, so like you said, Brady, there were a lot of people from the community that brought up a lot of really important points, and I want to address some of them as just a way of kind of making my comments. When Patricia Billig said that she's seen dog walkers improve their behavior since the 80s. Are you not hearing me well? Oh, that's not usually my problem. So I didn't expect that. Thank you. Okay. So when Patricia Billig said she's seen dog walkers improve their behavior since the 80s, I thought if we're going to allow bikers on trails, then we need to really think about creating a courtesy expectation through signage, through education, through outreach, and really educate the public on that. Alan Carpenter cautioned that it would be too dangerous to allow bikes on the last quarter mile of the Mesa Trail. And we walked the Mesa Trail with staff last year, and I totally agree. Part of the conversation that we've been talking about, or that I've been pushing to the extent that I have any kind of pull besides being just one member of a 5-member board, is that the South Boulder Creek West Trail is a pretty poorly maintained trail that runs through a lot of stream environment zones, gets muddy at a lot of different times of the year, and is inaccessible and closed a lot. And also goes through a lot of sensitive habitats, obviously. And so when we're talking about creating a connection, one of the options that we've been discussing for a multimodal connection is a quid pro quo whereby South Boulder Creek West gets abandoned and revegetated, and there's a very nice bench just to the north of South Boulder Creek West Trail that doesn't get soaked and inundated and isn't in as sensitive an area and would be more appropriate for a trail, whether it's a bike trail or a hiking trail. It's just a better place for a trail. It has better views. And if a new trail was the way we were going to go, then you could imagine sort of a serpentine tail at the end of that trail to get you down to the South Mesa trailhead, so you wouldn't have to have bicycles flying down South Mesa Trail, because that would create terrible interactions that none of us wanted to see. And in some ways, creating a new trail that we already have 2 trails. We have Lower Big Blue Stem Trail and South Boulder Creek West Trail that run parallel to each other. And if South Boulder Creek West were to be re-vegged and you moved and created a new trail closer to Lower Big Blue Stem Trail, I think in some ways that might be a good answer to Jerry Kelly, who warned that mountain bike use would increase habitat fragmentation. I think disturbing the environment with 2 trails that are closer to each other rather than having 2 trails that disturb the environment, which are further apart from each other, but close enough to create habitat fragmentation could actually be a better solution. So when we talk about, Sarah, you were asking about what the solutions are. One of the ones that was on the table was maybe, we create a new trail. Now, I heard, I can tell you also, I've randomly been sampling the South Boulder Creek West Trail by taking hikes on it at various different times of day and week. And I really have never found it to be crowded. So, again, one person on this board, not a scientist, don't hold the purse strings either. But when I think about, what trail, and people are going to flame me for this because some people love an unused trail. The people who use South Boulder Creek Trail love it, partly because nobody else uses it, maybe because it's largely unloved. These are my opinions. I heard, who was it who said that there is actually a direct mountain bike connection. There's a direct connection to Marshall Mesa, and we really don't. I guess Patricia said this again. You can get there without opening the West TSA to mountain bike trails, and I do. I ride through town, and then I go to Marshall Mesa, and I go up the Coal Seam Trail and over Community Ditch, and then I can get to Dowdy Draw, and I can get to the Springbrook Loop, and I don't actually need this Greenbrier connector. So I don't think that just opening up another trail in the West TSA to mountain bikes, if it doesn't have a benefit, if it doesn't have some sort of environmental or community benefit associated with it, is a good move. And that's why I'm really personally more focused on the idea of closing the trail that I think is bad for the environment and replacing it with one that would be better as a bike trail that's properly signed, properly educating people. Because I think that as much as I've figured out a way to get to the trails that I want to ride on my mountain bike, which are already open to mountain biking without using the streets, clearly the high school kids need a more direct route to their practice grounds. And so I do think that the idea of that Greenbrier connector trail with a new trail associated with it has some merit. So, like Crystal Gray said, I think we need to keep talking about this. We need to make sure that we find a good solution. And also, I would follow, and I'm sympathetic to Kate Rao's admonition to get this done and find a solution.
Welcome. Would you like to comment?
I want to comment on the rhetoric that people use against people who mountain bike. And I think one may easily write me off as a fast mountain biker. I have 2 children, they're 10 and 11. We're not fast mountain bikers. We hike, we look for birds, we play in the water where we can. I want to read off some of the comments that, first of all, let me just, good process, thank you. Look forward to understanding like multimodal opportunities to trails and trailheads. And these issues were conflated by virtue of the public comment we got over email and in this meeting, and I heard it all. And I'm really sad. I'm really sad that there's, in this day and age, that we're dehumanizing people who choose to ride a bike on open space, who have every right to ride a bike on open space, and using inflammatory language that's one-dimensional at the expense of a community. The reason why I'm on this board is because we can make change as a community locally. It's all local. Some of the comments we got were aggressive towards, mountain bikers are aggressive towards hikers. We're escalating the tension and the conflict. We're compromising safety and enjoyment. We're fast-moving bikers. Many of us don't know the rules. We loudly yell at hikers. We say, get out of my way. These are emails I got today. Mountain bikers don't accept that walkers have the right of way. We degrade the walker experience. It's a bike industry supported lobby. It's unsustainable recreation. We're flying down trails. It's not kind. It's not collaborative, and it's not fair. So in this process, thank you to staff for being very objective in your assessment, in your data collection. And I'm asking our community members If you would like this board to think about alternatives to new trails, to mountain bikers on existing trails, anything else, respect and acknowledgement that we're human beings who like to ride bikes and do a lot of other things, respect preservation, respect conservation, truly value the charter and will work to enforce it, that would go a lot longer. That would go a long way with me, and can't speak for my other trustees, but the dehumanizing one-dimensional language is not a way to connect with me. It puts me on my heels and I find it very sad. So that's my comment. I look forward to September and actually looking at options and solutions that staff puts forward. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Just a few thoughts, I guess. One of my favorite things of the public testimony was Crystal Gray. You mentioned Crystal Gray, and just the idea that we need to get out there together, walking these things. I want to ride the safest route to the trailhead that exists, and think about what that would feel like if I was riding behind a bunch of kids, one of whom may or may not veer off to the side at any given point. I think that was really sage advice. And so that's one thing that I really took away from all of this. Sarah, I thought you made a great statement, and I appreciate it. And I agree with a lot of what you say. And Maria, I hear your frustration. And one little anecdote, I was out riding the Dirty Bismarck on a gravel bike with my I was out riding the Dirty Bismarck on a gravel bike with my partner, and we had pulled off to the side of the trail. We're straddling our cyclists, so we couldn't be more cyclists. We just happened to be stationary. And somebody who, I don't know if he was going for his PR on Strava, but he nearly took us out with his shoulder. And I got adrenalized, and I had this urge to like chase him down and tell him not to do that anymore. Of course, I didn't do that. But I mean, cyclists can even be jerks to cyclists, And so I agree with your comments about dehumanizing language. And I think that was the thing that I found so frustrating with the West TSA process, because, you think this is bad. Oh my God. I mean, you maybe remember it too, but it was awful. I mean, the worst parts of humanity were coming out, and it was about biking and Boulder. It's just like, wow. So let's not do that. And I also appreciate what it feels like. And I felt it as a cyclist a week ago, what it feels like to be fearing for your safety because somebody's coming at you 25 miles an hour and they don't care. And so I do think that that is an experience that we have to take into account with whatever solution we come up with. And we've heard that loud and clear through the public comment. But other than that, I think we've had enough discussion about this. It's obviously passions are running high in some cases, but for the most part, I think so far we've been on much better behavior than we were during the West TSA process. So I appreciate that. And unless there's any other comments, maybe we can move on to the next agenda item. Thanks, everybody.
Brady, could we take 5?
Taking 5.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, we're gonna start again. Feel free to continue your conversation in the hall if you want, but we're gonna start the meeting back up. All right, Dan, what's next?
All right, thank you, Brady. We have still 2 remaining issues of matters from the board. The next issue is actually an emergent issue. It was not on our agendas previously. It's been an added item based on I believe it was a May 14th council discussion. And so it has been added as an agenda item as simply an inform right now to make sure you're up to speed on where things are at with this issue, but also to ask the board if and what type of role they would like to have in this upcoming process. And that way we would make sure we had adequate agenda time for you based on your preference. So the issue arose at a May 14th study session in which the charter subcommittee, which is a 2-member subcommittee of council members, Mark Wallach and Rob Kaplan's serve on that subcommittee right now. Part of the duties of that subcommittee is to review on an annual basis any changes to the charter that that they would like to submit for council consideration. And charter amendments could come in the form of council identifies an item, perhaps through a petition, the community identifies an item, or maybe city staff identifies an item, and it kind of filters through this subcommittee and ultimately to the board. So just to make sure we're all under the same sort of definitional understanding, the city charter is sort of our constitution, if you will. It's the home rule charter. There's a lot in there. There's open space specific stuff in there, mainly under, I believe it's section 13, section 12, sorry. And starting and specifically tonight, we're going to be talking about section 176. So, like I said, this charter committee will make recommendations, and ultimately it will lead to, should there be any November municipal ballots for voter consideration. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Leah. So at the May 14th, as I was saying, the subcommittee recommended that council consider amending Charter Section 176, which is the open space purposes section, in order to explicitly state that wildfire mitigation is an open space charter purpose. The majority of the council members indicated support for continuing to explore this type of amendment. At that time, city staff gave testimony that the current language has not prevented city staff from undertaking wildfire mitigation actions on open space lands. It's not been a barrier to date on any desired actions that we would like to take. It hasn't been a reason why we've either not gone on a faster pace than some would like. So we did provide that information to council at that May 14th meeting. However, the will of council was to continue to explore it. At that same meeting, there were several other council members that also expressed interest in expanding the amendment to capture other natural disasters on open space, such as flood. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to read this, but I urge you to do some homework and become very familiar with Charter Section 176, which is the open space purposes. And it's A through H, and then there's actually a second paragraph, a bottom paragraph, which talks about improving open space after its acquisition. And generally improving would mean, to place buildings and structures on open space. And so there's sort of two parts to this open space purposes. We can go to the next slide, please. So the next step is that the city staff, including our city's attorney's office, will now be working on developing possible amendment language and options for the full council to consider. They're going to be convening on August 6th, and that's the time at their regular meeting that they will decide on all ballot initiatives that would be placed on the November ballot, including whether or not Section 176 will move forward as a ballot amendment, as a proposed amendment to it. So staff can certainly come back to this board, probably at the July 8th meeting would be your opportunity that we could provide you any updates, and then based on the next slide to consider how you would like to be involved. So if we can go to the next slide, Leah. That is, does OSMP desire to provide feedback or recommendations to council on this item ahead of its August 6th meeting? And if yes, as I indicated before, staff will add time to the July 8th meeting, and we will work on providing you all a memo and to give you the update for what we have at that time, which will be about 1 month into this two-month process. So it may not be all the information, but we'll certainly have more information than we do tonight on this item. So Brady, that is a very brief memo, a very brief presentation, and opening up for questions.
Arm?
So Dan, the one thing I didn't see, the slides were all about council, but we already made a recommendation to council around adding wildfire to the open space purposes in the charter in an open space board meeting, right? Wasn't that like the March meeting or April? It was pretty recent.
Yeah, I would review that, and we could put that together. We'll as either an attachment to the July meeting or reference that meeting for you.
Okay. We did?
Yeah, we did. and we were talking about adding both uh, adding wildfire protection and flood protection. And I think I drafted a motion to that effect. And then you decided that you did not like the idea of adding flood. And I tried to argue with you that this was recency bias and that we're all freaked out about fire now. But if we were having this meeting 10 years ago, we would have been talking about flood too. And I think we acquiesced to your desires to get the motion passed and only kept the wildfire language in.
I believe that might have been in the council priority discussion,
Mm-hmm.
which would have been a November or December.
Oh, it was further back than I remember.
Yeah, I think it was when you were developing council priorities. But yeah, let us dig that back up. It's not that, it doesn't have to be dusted off.
Yeah.
It's not that far back.
Yeah, no, we
but yeah, we
definitely
can
had a
include that in
recommended
in the
resolution or something that we passed on
I'm
to
gonna have to
council.
go back and watch that.
Yeah.
Do you remember what meeting it was? It was November, December?
If
Something
my
like that. It was
recollection
cold.
is right, it's probably the December meeting. I think is it December or November when we finalize the council priority? Yeah.
It was not designed. I would think I was present.
It looks like December.
Yeah. We could try to do some hopping on right now to confirm that
Okay.
statement. And if
Yeah.
not, we can include it in the July packet for you.
But the question for tonight is whether we want to weigh in further on this, and to the extent that I'd like to reiterate my concern for flood, which is almost a co-equal concern to wildfire. I think I'd revisit our motion language from December, and maybe run it by you again, Brady, and see if I might be able to catch you on a different night.
I didn't realize that was such a stick in your spokes on this issue.
You were.
Can
Yeah.
comment? Okay, welcome. I definitely agree that we should include, I would like to participate. I would like to provide a statement to city council. So that's the answer to the ultimate question. Additional comments on the topic in general is that I do feel natural disaster as a broader topic is important. I had a really interesting exchange with a commercial property owner in North Boulder, two commercial property owners up there who have been dealing for years and years with high-risk floodplain planning, all kinds of issues that have basically reduced the value of their property and made it impossible to build on. And there's some contention there about whether open space did its job to properly protect. You might know who I'm talking about, Dan. I won't name names. Did we do our job to properly protect those properties prior to the flood? Because we ended up with a lot of flooding on the property. So people are still, it's still current event. It is still a current event and a very current topic for people, though it was many years ago. And it opened my eyes to the importance, not only for protecting the open space and the people in the what we call WUI in the fire conversation, but also livelihoods and business and property values. Because when these lands get destroyed adjacent to open space because we aren't doing our job with infrastructure or we haven't made it a mandate to prioritize it and to budget accordingly, it has consequences that do last for a decade or more. And so I think it's really important and it's on us to continue to advocate for that. And I understand that we can still get things done as written, as the charter is written. But I think that actually putting stronger language into the charter, it reminds everybody that this is a priority and it galvanizes the conversation, more interest in the conversation publicly, especially if it's a ballot initiative. And I like that. I'm sorry, I'm not looking over here at you. So I am in support of including it in the charter and expanding it to include natural disasters. Who knows what's next? I mean, I don't mean to be a doomsayer, but maybe it's not just floods and fire. Maybe it's natural disasters in general. Are there other things we should be looking at? But definitely those two. That's my comment.
Dan, to answer your question, I'd like to be kept up to date. And at the July meeting, I think that would be the right time if staff, what I think about is like what are the policy implications? So if you can do what you want, if staff and you and the department can do what they want to do with the charter as written, yet there's a desire to plan for the future, what might be some like externalities or some unintended consequences, if any, just like a thoughtful analysis of because I hear the need and I agree with the need to give the department all the tools it needs to plan for, mitigate, respond to natural disasters. But I hear the concern from some groups and individuals that opening up the charter without a justification and an analysis of potential consequences could be concerning. And I don't subscribe to slippery slope theory. I think things can be contained, but I'm just curious, like what activities may you want to do that may not be covered in the future? And then just from your policy staff, what might be the implications of opening it? And I can't think of any right now, but I just want to dot our I's and cross our T's. So I'd like to be kept up to date as time allows on our agenda.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've got a few comments. I might address that too. So I'd love to have opportunity, Dan, to weigh in on this. I'd also reserve the right to contradict myself and change my mind. Um, and I think, so there's a few arguments. I've had a discussion with a number of people about this issue. Some people think that this CU South issue might not have been so long and contentious if flood mitigation had been included as a charter purpose. One of the staff's points is like, well, yeah, but we can just do a disposal. Well, that was tricky. It took a long time. Now that might not, I think reasonable minds may be able to disagree on that point. But someone could say, well, we can do wildfire mitigation on open space for the purposes of open space, but it's not for the purposes of preventing the city from burning down. And if someone were to call that question, the argument would be that clarifying this as a actual open space purpose would defend us from that claim. Now you could say, well, if we needed to do something more invasive along the border, we could do it, we could imagine a world in which disposal would be one of the tools. But if we had to do management actions further back where disposal wasn't a means to kind of rectify, then having that charter purpose would be potentially come in handy. And then there's the slippery slope argument and the argument that, the charter is simple and there's going to be unintended consequences. Are we going to build fire stations up in Chautauqua now? So we have to think about all those scenarios. One question I have, Dan, for the memo is what are the budget implications if mitigation for fire for the purposes of the city becomes an open space purpose? Is there a direct or potential budget implication for that? And I think it's relevant in the increasing pressure that I don't think is going to go away for the public realm tax consolidation, effectively doing away with our dedicated funds. And if fire mitigation becomes an open space purpose, will there be more of a justification and a desire for more of the onus of that work to come within our budget?
Yeah.
I think that it would be great if the memo touched on that. Since we're discussing it, I'll just weigh in. I think one of the ways that we as a board can defend, if you will, the dedicated sales tax is by shouldering some of the burden that the city feels and not just pretending that we're this isolated unit. And if the city is in desperate need of fire mitigation and flood mitigation, to your point, and it's an open space purpose, then some of that comes into the open space budget, and that's going to be that some people aren't going to like that. Some of the most staunch defenders of this program and this budget aren't going to like that. But I think that should be part of the analysis. So I'll let others comment.
Yeah, I liked Sarah's concept, and maybe broaden it even a tiny bit more, because so much of what we are coping with is human caused hazards as well as natural hazards. So maybe council's focused on fire and flood. Maybe we send them a resolution saying, we'd like you to consider charter language that speaks to mitigation of human and natural caused hazards. that could impact the community, or something along those lines. And I hear what you're saying, and there's a fear, right, that once you say open space land has this other purpose of protecting against hazards, well, now we can use open space for fire breaks, we can use open space for building dams, and stuff like that. And so I think we need to be wary of that, and consider that as well, because we don't want to create a provision in the charter that runs at cross purposes to other provisions of the charter. I don't want that internal inconsistency to tie us up. So thank you for bringing that up as well. But I think, as I'm getting a feeling like there's a consensus here on the four of us who are here tonight, that we want to work on this in July so that we can hand something over to council before the August meeting.
It feels like a really productive conversation, and I'm glad that we're having it, because these are the questions that are happening under, these are the questions that, what's the word I'm looking, bubbling up from underneath. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I'll save most of the analysis for July, but just one comment I would like to make. One of my concerns is less about opening up the charter and language. It's the perception that those that don't follow it, maybe when it's on the charter ballot, are thinking, what? They're not doing that now. They need this charter amendment in order to do this action. So Brady, back to your point, what would it mean for us if this was a charter purpose? We already believe it is a charter purpose. And so we've more than doubled our resources in the last 3 years on wildfire. Even in a shrinking budget, I still am looking for ways to actually enhance that investment rather than decrease it, where most everything's going to be decreasing. So again, I just want to reiterate to those who are listening that the charter has not impeded our motion forward to this date. It's already a purpose, and if it does end up on the ballot, community, please know that we haven't been impeded from that. So just want to keep reiterating that.
Well, and I would just say back, Dan, thanks for that. And I don't think this, I'll speak for myself and maybe everyone, we wouldn't see this as a referendum on whether or not, open space is doing their job or not or has been, on fire mitigation. So I can see where you could, if we weren't careful on how we talk about this, it would transmit to the community that we hadn't been doing anything on this, but I don't think that's the intention of putting this on the ballot.
So Dan, with that in mind, and I agree with you, and I agree with Brady, and there's been a ton of work done in mitigation with no changes to the charter. Who gets to write the blue book before a local election? And if you have any control over that, that's an opportunity potentially to say, something that educates the public around the commitment that's already being made to hazard mitigation by OSMP. But, this charter amendment that's on the ballot would be to sort of formalize the activities that we're already engaged in the charter. Is the blue book something you have a way to touch?
I'm learning this now as we go. It's you always learn new things, and diving into how ballot language initiatives is created is something that I'll be more familiar with in another month or so. But the city attorney's office is the responsible entity for drafting ballot language. And in addition to the ballot, there'll also be an ordinance. So there's the ballot language itself, and then that is actually supported by an ordinance that becomes part of the Boulder Revised Code. And that ordinance has preambles, it has whereases. And so the value of an ordinance is outside of the very specific ballot language, which trumps everything. That ballot language is very important. But you can get into legislative intent through language that's in the ordinance, which can be more flowery, more background, more whereas type of stuff. So that's my understanding, is that there's really, if it does proceed to the ballot, is that there's the ordinance itself and then the ballot language itself. So few opportunities to bring language into the equation.
Okay, I would just offer that as the city attorney's client, you might be able to exercise a little bit more of the influence on actually how the ballot gets presented too.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say I think that in my so I understand that there has been a lot of pressure applied. There's a lot of energy that has to go into saying, hey, we really do care about this and we really are doing everything that we can. And we intend to do more and more over time. This is a top priority for our department. I've been on the front lines there having those conversations in the community on our behalf as a department. Um, I would offer like I actually see it as the reverse of what you're describing, Dan. I see this as an opportunity to say somewhere in that preamble, like whereby and whereas the open space department is committed to and is budgeting for and spending taxpayer dollars on fire mitigation, we are wanting to pass this as a part of our charter that we want to acknowledge that this is something that is a priority within the city. It's like an acknowledgement that we are prioritizing it, not an admonishment to say, well, it isn't being prioritized at all. So, and when I think of Mark Wallach and I think of Rob Kaplan, who are specifically on that subcommittee, and I know those guys and I know their perspective on fire, I believe, I think there's a positive energy and a positive momentum coming. I mean, Rob Kaplan was a firefighter for many years, and he really ran on that. That was a strong part of his platform. So I think he's just wanting to, it's more of like the home team wanting to raise the flag that this is something we care about, kind of a sentiment. And it is for me, for sure.
Did you get the direction you needed?
Yeah,
Dan?
just and if there's anything else in addition to just the straightforward update where we're at, I don't know where we'll be with language at that time on July 8th, but some things that you're interested in and exploring within the memo is policy implications, externalities, that unintended consequences, budget implications. Is there any other buzzwords that you want me to note other than?
Are you? Does staff have? Do you anticipate that staff would have a position on this and would make a recommendation, or is this going to be background?
I would anticipate that this is probably going to be more background. I don't think we'll have a staff recommendation on this issue, but like I said, it's emerging. Conversations are just beginning as far as working this through. So no way of knowing at this point for sure.
If you do have a strong opinion about it, I'd like to know.
Yeah. Well, I think through these subject matters, if there are concerns, we can describe them through these buckets that you have asked for.
Okay, thanks. Okay, that's a wrap on that one.
All right, we're going to wind it down. Jeff's coming up to kick us off on a brief update on Lisa Gonzalo's presentation that's forthcoming. But a brief update on our Flagstaff operations and management program. And Morgan, we're going to do a little bit of background on this for you. It's been something that the rest of your colleagues have been hearing about pretty consistently over the last 3 or 4 years. But we like to come at least annually at this point to give you an update on where things are at with that initiative.
Thank you. Jeff Haley, Deputy Director for Visitor Experience and Infrastructure. And yeah, Flagstaff Mountain, once again, we're here talking about that. As Dan mentioned, Morgan, primarily the Flagstaff corridor, just so you know, it's actually the roadway is managed by Boulder County. And so the sheriff office is involved in managing that for enforcement and regulatory work. The county transportation department does a lot of maintenance on the roadway. But the reason we're here discussing it is because we manage all the open space and recreation and ecological values throughout the mountain and that corridor. So in fact, when we think about Flagstaff with this evening's agenda, it's similar to what we're up to with the multimodal 7C process. It's an area that we've been managing and thinking about for many years. There's a lot of recreation opportunities, a lot of things and goals we'd like to achieve. And our staff, working with the board, has kind of worked through kind of a visitor use management process, and you'll hear more here in a moment, what we consider the 3 E's. That's education, enforcement, and engineering. So when I compare it to multimodal, it's kind of the same thing where we're saying, what's the goal what are we trying to achieve? Kind of like what Sarah was asking about earlier. What's the plot here? And we've implemented several strategies in those three categories and now have some good results that we're ready to report on, but certainly not complete. I mean, there's a lot more. The roadway continues all the way up the mountain and beyond. So there's a lot more work ahead of us. This evening in the presentation, just kind of listen for what it is we have been doing, what the results are that we're seeing from those actions. We're going to talk a little bit about budget and what the implications are. All of our focus right now is a lot on budget, and then kind of what's up, what our next steps are. So Lisa Consalo is online and going to present remotely. She is our rec stewardship senior program manager and really been the project manager on this current phase of the project. So go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you for that great kickoff, Jeff. I just wanted, before I get into the presentation, ensure that you can hear me and everything's working okay on your end.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for confirming. Just going to turn my video off for the presentation. And Leah, thank you for having that up and ready to go. So yeah, today I'm going to present an update on the Flagstaff Corridor Operations and Management Project. The overall purpose is to review and identify potential improvements to OSMP managed land along the Flagstaff Road corridor with an emphasis on addressing management challenges and safety concerns. This is an ongoing project that we've been updating the board as we have items to share, and this is the first touch with you all this year, so it's good to see you again and be back. Next slide. Over the years, OSMP rangers working with local law enforcement agencies have been responding to illegal behavior on Flagstaff. This activity includes things like vandalism, such as graffiti, litter, broken glass, driving under the influence, smoking, illegal fires. These violations are also occurring primarily at night when parking is already prohibited between the hours of 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. And observed very low compliance in the past with this regulation. So people continue to park illegally within our trailheads after hours. And then lastly, the legal behavior has largely been linked to people coming in their vehicles, parking in the trailheads, and then remaining inside and engaging in shenanigans, as I like to say. Next slide, please. Efforts to deter illegal activity after hours has been ongoing since 2019, and these updates have been shared with the board previously, but have included, for example, the installation of gates at various locations, updated signage, and regulations, which includes the no parking hours from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., the prohibited consumption of alcohol and marijuana, that's system-wide, and the removal of grills from all picnic areas along Flagstaff Road to reduce the risk of fire. Next slide. So beginning in June of 2024, a staff team comprised of interdisciplinary subject matter experts within the department was created to better understand and define the existing management, visitor safety, and natural resource impact concerns in this area. Staff along the way have also met with external stakeholders like the Boulder Police Department, Boulder County Sheriff's Office, Boulder County Transportation, and Flagstaff residents that they named themselves the Fire Prevention Action Committee to better understand their concerns. One key partner that I want to mention along with these is the Flatirons Climbing Council, who identified a number of bouldering opportunities in the area, particularly at Crown Rock and Contact Corner further up the road beyond the 2-mile mark. We've had the privilege of doing multiple site visits with the FCC and the BCC and intend to continue this important communication moving forward. So as staff consider how best to strike the careful balance of decreasing illegal and criminal activities after hours, we also want to identify opportunities for improved amenities and visitor experience. To accomplish this, as Jeff mentioned before, is focusing on the 3 E's: engineering, education, and enforcement. The E's were established by the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council, or IVUMC. Engineering is intended to use site design solutions to encourage or discourage appropriate uses. Education is intended to modify visitor behavior, adjust visitor attitudes and expectations. And then lastly, enforcement can be used to implement all these management strategies as needed by restricting or prohibiting access to specific locations or particular times or by types of behavior. Elements of all of these E's are intended or are needed to have the management solution be successful. In the fall of 2025, the scope was narrowed from the entirety of the Flagstaff corridor up to the 5-mile mark to just the first 1.2 miles, with 2026 focusing on implementation and monitoring. And looking ahead, we hope to take lessons learned from 2026 and apply them in 2027 as well. Next slide. The newly defined area includes 2 trailheads, Panorama Point and the Halfway House, and 7 undesignated pull-offs beginning at number 1, which is directly across from the Gregory Canyon Trailhead. These pull-offs were reviewed by Boulder County Transportation, and they didn't support number 7 without much of an explanation, but that was fine. We removed that one from the list. And just wanted to mention as well that while we're talking a lot about trailhead closures, all of the designated trails on Flagstaff Mountain will remain closed and will remain open and have remained open for 24 hours a day for passive recreational use. Next slide. So as you recall from previous presentations and perhaps personal experience driving through the Panorama Point Trailhead, the previous layout had 2 points of entry at the right side of the screen in the orange, and then vehicle traffic flowed in a clockwise direction. The orange shaded teardrop in the middle there was once operated as a fee collection site that hadn't been used for a long time and has since been removed. Next slide. Part of the work in 2025 was to have OTAC, a civil engineering company, evaluate the trailhead for safe and efficient vehicle and pedestrian circulation, access control, and compliance with applicable design standards. As a result, the vehicle direction was changed to be a counterclockwise movement to provide a better sightline for vehicles exiting the trailhead. The signage was replaced and relocated. Temporary metal fencing and permanent 16-foot gates were installed to support the nightly closure, and the ADA parking space was actually relocated to the right side of the trailhead, or the northern end, to improve access once the gate was locked open. So installation was completed officially on Friday, November 14th of 2025. Next slide. The nightly trailhead closure began on the same date, and we are now 7 months in. So to implement the closure, staff have contracted with Colorado Security Services, or CSS, to clear the trailhead and close the gates every night at 9 p.m. and then reopen them at 5. There's a variable messaging sign that updates visitors of the nightly closures. Security does their due diligence every night to make a verbal announcement as well as a foot patrol around the area to inform visitors prior to closing that gate. When they can't be located, they go ahead and lock the gate, but there is a sign posted to call to be let out, both in English and Spanish. They then send a follow-up report to OSMP Rangers, who send a parking citation by mail. To date, Rangers have issued 16 parking citations. We've been fortunate so far to not have any vandalism to the infrastructure. That was up until about a month ago. We got our first report of a wooden parking bollard that was found on the ground. It wasn't pulled out, but looks like it was hit by something very heavy, perhaps a vehicle, we don't know. And then just the other night, we had someone cut the chain being used to hold the gate closed, and Rangers are following up with the vehicle owner. We'll see what the summer holds for us as we anticipate increased activity with the nicer weather and longer daylight hours, but fingers crossed. Next slide. So the other trailhead within scope is the Halfway House Trailhead and associated shelter. Originally constructed in 1919 by the Lions Club, it was known as the Panorama Shelter House. The facility was rebuilt in 1933 by the Civilian Conservation Corps. An article from the Boulder Daily Camera from May 17, 1921, states that the maintenance of the shelter house should be done by the city, and that, quote, the cleaning of the shelter house once or twice a month would be a very inexpensive matter for the city to undertake, commensurate with the amount of pleasure given citizens who use the houses for beefsteak fries and other picnics. Next slide. So the stewardship continues to this day as trailhead staff clean and maintain the shelter for reservations by the public. And although beefsteak stir fries have largely fallen out of fashion, the shelter has become a desirable wedding reception location. Next slide. The Halfway House is closed from Veterans Day to New Year's Day to support the Boulder Star air closure when it is lit. This year, 2 weeks after the trailhead was reopened in January, trailhead staff found numerous bullet shell casings, empty beer cans, and clay pigeons. It appeared as though people were putting the beer cans on top of the wooden bollards and then shooting at them. Since then, staff have cleared the trailhead of numerous cigarette butts and empty alcohol cans, and this is the type of behavior that we want to discourage after hours. The image in the center there just shows the current parking layout, which is all pull-in spaces. Next slide. So the current layout can accommodate 10 vehicles with 1 ADA space, with a space on the very far left with those hash marks for staff vehicles to park for trailhead maintenance. This layout has proven much more difficult for us to develop a clear and easily implemented nightly parking closure, but we've explored several options. Next slide, please. Options have included collapsible bollards, removable bollards, folding gates, And we've gone through these with our security company as well as staff from a maintenance perspective, from aesthetic value, process. And we just have not found the perfect solution to close the trailhead after hours and to be flexible in that we're going to be asking a security guard to do this every night and every morning. And so it needs to be somewhat lightweight. It needs to be visible for the public to not strike it. We don't want to cause any additional safety concerns. And so we're still trying to figure out the perfect solution from an infrastructure standpoint, but stay tuned. Hopefully we will have a positive update soon. Next slide. So as we explore infrastructure to support the nightly closures, we also want to explore opportunities to improve the visitor experience. Leah, can you please click next for a fun animation? One idea was to remove the existing wooden bollards and build a walkway at the east end of the parking lot, or where the parking cars pull in, so that visitors don't need to walk through the parking area. And Leah, one more time. We would also install concrete wheel stops and replace the wooden bollards that are currently on the outside to stop vehicles from driving into the grassy meadow. And then lastly, we learned that the ADA space in its existing location isn't in compliance with accessibility standards, as it exceeds the maximum slope of 2%. So one of these improvements is that we'd like to identify an alternative location to relocate that ADA space to bring it into compliance. Next slide. So in terms of long-term actions, the Panorama Point Trailhead has been identified as an area in need of some love for some time. Some of the pavement is cracking. The wooden bollards, as they are either struck or splintered over time, need to be replaced, but that's expensive and challenging. The metal fencing was only ever intended to be temporary, and so staff are now thinking through a more permanent and aesthetically appealing infrastructure alternative. And lastly, the island where the fee station was once located can now be repurposed and rethought, and how we can reuse this space in a positive way. Next slide. This image was taken from the 1937 Master Plan for Boulder Mountain Parks, and it provided the first standardized, detailed, written descriptions of each mountain park and its recreational amenities. And listed here are the Halfway House Trailhead, there's the shelter, and there's the Panorama Point Trailhead. And so, as you can see, the layout remains largely the same almost 90 years later. Next slide. And so looking at this area holistically, including the Flagstaff House restaurant on the northern end, as well as restrooms on the very southern end that serve both the shelter and the trailheads, are there opportunities to think through any improvements that would help the visitor experience? And this, as well as the Panorama Point Trailhead Improvement Project, will be led by Trail Supervisor Greg Seablum. So we're excited to see if there's any opportunities for improvements. Next slide. One of the most important E's is enforcement, and rangers in coordination with the Boulder County Sheriff's Office and Boulder Police Department committed to targeted after-hours patrol between May 30th and August 30th. This is the same time frame as occurred last year, and together they completed more than 135 hours of patrol time in 2025, which is remarkable. As always, overtime is voluntary and must be balanced with other competing priorities, such as calls for service at the time and special events, but we're grateful to them for recommitting to this effort this year. Next slide. This graph that was included in the written update, it's a little difficult to read, and I'm sorry for that. So I'll add a little description. The x-axis is time in months, specifically September through January. The y-axis shows a number from 0 to 6 to reflect the number of calls for service by day. The red line marks when the gate at Panorama Point was installed and the closure was enacted. As you can see, prior to the gate installation, there was a steady number of calls for service, up to 2 a night, between the hours of 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. And after the gate was installed, it went to 0. Next slide. This graph shows the number of calls for service for the entirety of Flagstaff Road up to the 5-mile mark. The y-axis here goes up to 16, with the same monthly timeframe on the bottom. One concern staff had was that the gate closure would displace and thereby increase the illegal behavior further up the road, but the numbers remained relatively steady, though of course still present, which is still a concern. But it was nice to see that there wasn't a large spike in activity after that gate closure on the rest of the mountain. Next slide. So for our next steps, as I mentioned, 2026 is going to be focused on the 1.2 initial miles of Flagstaff Road to continue implementation and we will continue kind of operating as is with our Vero messaging sign remaining in that location, messaging to the public about the closure, continued collaborative enforcement, as I mentioned. And then monitoring will be a key piece as well. So continuing communication with the Boulder County Sheriff's Office to gather data over more time, and especially as we get into the summer months, we'll implement the pull-off closures and then, yeah, continue tracking data. So what we're excited to kicking off this month with Greg Seabloom is that staff will complete a preliminary design and cost estimate to continue permitting with construction anticipated next year. And staff are including funding in the 2027-2032 CIP budget that will be presented for review and consideration of approval by OSBT in September. And with that, I ask if there's any questions. Next slide, please.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Lisa. And remind me, what construction would Greg and his team be undertaking?
Yeah, Panorama Point construction. So the re-beautification of the trailhead.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
You got it.
I've been listening, I promise.
Oh, no worries. It's getting later at night.
And what was the budget? It said $50 or $5,000. It might have been a typo in the presentation.
It's 50,000. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Missing zero. Okay.
Yeah, 50,000 for this year.
And that's just, and what does that encompass?
That is set aside for primarily consulting fees and kind of project management to get the final, the engineering, design, survey work to do the final construction there at Panorama Point, so we can remove the metal barricades and the temporary setup. So, yeah.
Lisa, that's an awesome presentation. Thank you. My only question from the presentation is when you showed the cut chain at Panorama Point, and you said that the rangers are going to follow up with the vehicle owner. Is that a byproduct of the cameras that we've put up there, that you were able to identify the person in the vehicle that cut the chain?
Yeah, great question. Actually, not the cameras. The security officer takes a photo of the vehicle, of any vehicle that's left within the trailhead, including the license plate. And then they'll go ahead and lock the gate. And that's the report that they send to the rangers. So there was only one vehicle left inside the trailhead that night. And so that's how we know who was inside, and then obviously that vehicle was gone in the morning when they came to open the gate.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
It's just a comment. I think that it's really nice to see the flat line in there, and I'll be curious. I know you already mentioned this, but I too am curious what's going to happen over the summer. How will things shake out as we get into the warmer season?
Be interesting.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Lisa. And also, I just think we made a lot of progress on this last few years. I mean, I just remember we had a retreat where we had one of our rangers basically expressing despair over the situation. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't want to call her out, but it was a hopeless situation for some of our staff. And I would imagine, Lisa, if we asked them today, they would not feel that way.
I think hopeful, might, not to put words in her mouth, but I think that would be like we're moving in the right direction. And I do appreciate that we're considering the visitor experience and improvements we can make that with that along the way. So we're not just putting up metal gates everywhere and closing everything off, but it's a balanced approach, which I think is key as well.
One more question. Dan, have you gotten any feedback from the community members that were really, we had a lot of people coming here and talking about Flagstaff in particular last year?
I think towards the end of the year, when we hit that May or that November date, this is totally anecdotal. Maybe Lisa or Jeff can recall, but I think we did have some public testimony in appreciation for the efforts of when we put the physical closure in place at 9. Because I don't know if it was that summer or the summer before, but the illegal firework activities, and we had fires there that we were lucky to catch in time. So there was a lot of concern with Panorama Point, and I know we had some appreciation for sure.
Yeah, I think we've definitely had less concern from the community and the residents and the neighbors in the general area. But there's also still, in fact, I didn't mention earlier, obviously we talked with the board recently about the system-wide closures we've been doing for kind of preemptive closures for fire, weather, and that sort of thing. Flagstaff is still one corridor that, as Lisa was mentioning, it's very difficult to close. All the pull-offs, all the trailheads, they're basically wide spots in the road. So that's a thing we have heard is just, yep, panorama's great. Let's keep going up, you know, where we can secure some of those areas. So that's the challenge we have. And I did want to highlight, Sarah, I think you were just asking about the summer. We do close the road or these areas during 4th of July, especially just given the busy visitation and fire, you know, propensity for fireworks and that sort of thing. So that will be closed again this season.
Yeah, I believe that's a late afternoon into the evening closure. If I remember correctly, I don't think it's all day. At least I don't know if you know, but I thought it was a 6 to 9.
Yeah, 6 to 11, I think, is the time for.
Yeah.
And then still open to residents, but yeah.
No, the implications of really bad behavior have massive consequences, and it's nice, and it's just such a big people problem, really, just bad behavior. And it's nice to see just a lot of the infrastructure and enforcement pieces working. So and thanks for bringing me up to speed.
Yeah, I guess my comment is really kudos to staff for everything that's been on your priority list and how quickly you put it on the list and got things effectuated. A year ago, we were hearing from multiple members of the community with urgency at every meeting, and I think that the fact that I don't want to call them satisfied customers, but we've certainly shown. And great kudos to you for showing a really, really fulsome response. So congratulations. And, you know, when you can get to the point where you're making jokes in the newsletter, Janelle, I thought the driver's ed joke was pretty funny in the last one. So thanks for that. That had to do with somebody who drifted around a curve or something like that on Flagstaff. Still a dangerous place, still got people problems, but doing good stuff to get it under control. And Lisa, I like your idea about the redesign with the wheel stops instead of the bollards at Halfway House. It's mortifying to think that people were putting targets on top of those bollards, given the fact that any bullets that didn't stop, and I can't imagine what you put on top of a bollard would necessarily stop a bullet, would go into West Boulder potentially, where people live and where rooftops are. So that's pretty horrifying. And just add that to the list of horrifying things that happen on Flagstaff. So good on you for coming up with an idea for how to mitigate that and do it in a way that's aesthetic and probably improves pedestrian safety as well. So those are my comments, and thanks for the report.
Yeah, appreciate it. And just a big thank you. I mean, I'm just one piece of this wheel, but the staff involvement from the ranger work group to trailheads to signage. I mean, it's been a whole group of people that have really prioritized this project. So big thank you to them as well.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks. I think that closes out. Dan, you got any?
Yeah, I just want to make note that it's 9:01, so you failed to meet your 9 o'clock. And Harmon, I think, was stealing some air just to make sure you weren't going to close at 9. So you two can take this up.
I'm going to steal more. I've got a question for you.
We had great public comment though, so we'll take it.
Yeah, we'll take it. Yeah, we'll take it. And no more.
Did you have another? Yeah, go ahead.
So I don't want to steal any thunder if you've got a director's report, and please
not tonight.
Go through that. But I just had a question that I think members of the public are probably curious about, and it's good that Jeff's up there with you. Maybe he's the right person to answer. But the Flatirons Vista Trailhead closure is something that hasn't come up at board meetings that I can remember. If I missed it, I don't know how. And maybe it's just regular maintenance, but if we could just get a quick update on what's going on at Flatirons Vista Trailhead, since a lot of people probably pass it on 93.
Jeff, if you want to give a 30-second answer tonight, but we have a more extensive update for you. Is it next month? In July, we're going to have a trailhead capital projects. And so we'll give you an update on that. We did brief you on the 3 trailheads that were due to be renovated this year. And I believe, Jeff, you want to come back in July and kind of report out on that?
Yeah. And just one 30-second update. the construction should be complete at Flatirons Vista by the end of this month. So in fact, I just talked to our PM this afternoon and he said definitely by 4th of July. So just, we will have more information about that and other projects next month for sure. But for those that are wondering, by the end of the month, it'll be reopened.
And that's great. If anybody out there is listening, I think they'd probably appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, Brady, we're done as staff.
You don't have any director comments for us?
We just gave you one.
That was it? That was it? I'm disappointed. What can I say? Okay. The June 10th, 2026 meeting of the Open Space Board of Trustees is hereby adjourned. Thank you.